Chapter 80. Retreat. Soren and the other adventurers looked at each other and retreated at the same time. Facing so many ogres was no joke. If the 5 of them were discovered, they wouldn't be able to escape. Ogres were very fast on the plains, not to mention that many ogres and tribes could activate bloodthirsty berserk. Although the ogres would enter a weakened state after going berserk, they would still be able to kill all the adventurers while they were still in berserk mode. I'm afraid this will be a tough battle. The half-elf ranger looked at the other adventurers and said in a low voice, "It won't be easy to expel these ogres, and with a 2-headed ogre wizard, the chances of success will be even lower." Another adventurer who looked like a warrior and a swordsman nodded and said seriously, "We can only rely on Wyvern's strength now. After all, it's impossible for them to not send out high-grade professions for a mission like this. If a high-grade wizard is involved, it's not impossible to expel these ogres." Advanced professions were Tier 1, Tier 2 after level 5, and Tier 3 after level 10. Usually high-grade professions were those with a profession level of 15 and above. There weren't many of them in any place, and in a city, they were at least high-grade military officers. Most of the adventurers who came out this time were between Grade 2 and Grade 3. Those with a profession level of 15 and above rarely went out adventuring, and even if they did, they wouldn't do it in the wilderness because they had more choices. If they wanted to, they could easily enter the ruling class, become the leader of one of the few gangs in the city, or join some organizations and become a high-grade manager. Whether it was power or wealth, they were much better than ordinary adventuring. Soren didn't say anything. He thought that whether they succeeded or failed, the most important thing was to protect himself. Earning more slaughter EXP while ensuring his own safety was the way to go. After all, swords had no eyes on the battlefield, and he definitely wouldn't participate in the battle this time. This kind of battle depended on the strength of Wyvern's army. It seemed that Wyvern's previous failures had paid off. Otherwise they wouldn't have brought out the golems. The other adventurers brought back the news one step ahead of them. There was no lack of experts among them, so it was not strange for them to return earlier than them. The Whiterun army was separated from the adventurers, and the person in charge of this operation had yet to show up. Many adventurers were dissatisfied with this. After all, this was a war. Whether it was the generals of Whiterun or the nobles of the parliament, at the very least, the adventurers would have a better idea of their strength. Without the intervention of high-grade professions, the casualties in such a battle would be astonishing. Some adventurers had already begun to prepare for retreat. After all, no one would throw away their life for a few dozen kindlers' rewards. Wyvern's army continued to advance. Because of the intelligence they gathered, engineers had already begun to build war machines. Magic statues appeared in front of everyone's eyes one after another, and the sorcerers led their apprentices to adjust and recharge the magic power. Most of them were stone golems and some of them were iron golems. The crafting of golems was widely spread among wizards, and it required a high level of alchemy. Normally, only Grade 3 wizards could craft them. These golems were very cumbersome and consumed a lot of energy, so they were rarely carried around by guards. They were only used on battlefields or guarding wizard towers. It was difficult for an army of 2,000 people to hide from the ogres. This was especially true in the plains. When Soren discovered the ogre fortress, the enslaved gnolls had already discovered the army's tracks. Ogre fortress. A 2-headed ogre mage let out a muffled roar and bellowed, "Prepare for battle. You fools. All of you pick up your weapons and lock the captives in the cages." The ogre looked behind it and saw a gnoll scout kneeling at its feet. "Very well, my slave. I grant you freedom. Continue to serve me, and I will help you become the new leader of the gnolls. I will grant you a piece of land in my territory and let you build your own tribe." The ogres had many vassals, and they knew how to enslave most of the creatures in the wilderness. One by one, the strong ogres gathered together. It was hard to tell the gender of the ogres, but they all looked the same. They could eat meat from birth and didn't need to be breastfed. Ogre cubs could weigh up to 30 pounds. Children that were not strong enough would be abandoned, or even killed and eaten directly. These creatures looked stupid, but they had powerful battle instincts. Most of the ogres only had 6 points of intelligence, and even wolves couldn't compare to them. From time to time, wizards and sorcerers with amazing intelligence would be born. Thick spiked maces were distributed to the ogres, and the enslaved goblins were busy helping them put on armor. These were all inferior products that were made in a hurry. Some kobolds had 50 points of smithing ability, and the ogre tribes had inherited the craftsmanship of weapons and armor. These equipment were heavy and cumbersome. Most of them were individual parts such as spiked pauldrons, heavy gauntlets, and cast breastplates. The ogres couldn't make complete armor with their craftsmanship, so they were simply cast from molten iron. They relied on their weight in exchange for strong defense. Gather the Bone Shatterer hunters. The two-headed ogre wizard roared, and the ogres gathered into a simple formation. They were completely different from the messy ogre tribes, and they had received strict training. Asterisk crack. Asterisk the sound of a whip rang out. An ogre wearing full body armor and wielding a heavy battle axe walked out. It used a leather whip to whip the other ogres. The leather whip that would take away half of a gnoll's life only left a red mark on the ogres' bodies. The strong ogre warlord roared, "Idiots! Gather! Warriors of the Bone Shatterer tribe, come and take your weapons." Heavy battle axes, spiked armor, leather armor sewn from the skins of humanoids and beasts, and iron spears that were 2 meters long were all distributed to the ogre warriors. These ogres that looked even bigger had white ash smeared across their faces. Some even had horns on their foreheads that were only 10 centimeters long. They also had strange tattoos on their bodies. This was some kind of ancient ritual. Shamans used daggers to cut open their arms, smeared some medicine on them and fed them a special potion. After this ritual, the ogres would become even stronger. Their skin would become as tough as cowhide, and they could also activate some kind of innate ability to enter a frenzied state of bloodlust. Iron weapons, iron armor, throwing spears and heavy flying axes. About 1 to 200 ogres were armed. Some of the ogres wielding whips opened the cages and chased out some wild boars that weighed half a ton and had sharp spikes on their backs. These were ironback wild boars that lived in the depths of the wilderness. They were one of the few animals that the ogres knew how to tame. Ogres did not know how to grow their own food. They only knew how to tame and feed some special beasts. In times of war, these beasts were also part of their strength. They knew how to drive captives and wild beasts to attack the enemy and deplete their strength first. The plains had a wide field of vision. Not to mention the ogre fortress was built halfway up the mountain. They could see Whiterun's army moving from afar. The two-headed ogre warlord led the army to the foot of the mountain. Ogres rarely relied on fortresses for defense. This was because once a battle started, the ogres would rush out on their own and kill everything in sight. Ogres with whips were driving the gnolls away from the rear. Inferior food like goblins and kobolds were not even qualified to be their cannon fodder. Dong, dong, dong. Dull war drums sounded. An ogre that seemed to have advanced into a shaman beat a war drum made of mammoth skin and roared at the sky. Humans. The two-headed ogre's voice boomed like thunder. It cast a spell on itself and stood at the front of the ogre army. The one standing before you is the demigod Heigl, the astral traveler, the descendant of Grondo the dragon slayer. The two-headed ogre roared at the approaching Whiterun guards. The leader of the two-headed ogres, Grizzado. This land shall become the territory of the Bone Shatterer tribe. Tell your leader to come out and talk to me. The Whiterun guards were slightly disturbed. The ogres were far more intelligent than they had imagined. They could even speak in the common tongue. Formation. A fierce female voice rang out. Then a vigorous figure walked out. She was wearing an exquisite leather armor with runes inscribed on it. She held a battle spear in her hand. Her long black hair was tied up with a ribbon. There was a scar on her heroic face. This was not the most eye-catching thing. What surprised the adventurers more than the fact that the Whiterun commander was a woman was that she only had one breast. The right breast had obviously been cut off. A breast-cutting ceremony. The adventurers were a little restless. From time to time, someone would exclaim in a low voice, "A female warrior from the tropical forest." Why would Whiterun let that group of women lead the army? The heroic female warrior walked to the front. She rotated her war spear and stabbed it into the ground. A lightning arc jumped on her hand and weapon. She stood at the front of the army, holding the war spear tightly in her hands. She looked like a valkyrie from the age of mythology, and the adventurers who were harassing her at first quickly cheered up. A legendary? A storm lord? Soren's pupils shrank slightly. The other adventurers were also shocked. Standing in front of them was a legendary class. She was a storm lord, a priest, a warrior, a droll, and a barbarian who believed in the god of storms. P.S. Thanks to Moneymaker for the tip. This will be published on December 1st. Tips on that day will give monthly votes. When the time comes, a leader will appear and Fuda will start to update. Chapter 81. A Legendary Storm Lord. This was Soren's first time seeing a legendary class holder in this world. Although the owner of the caravan was very powerful, she was only a high-grade wizard, and there was still a long way to go. The woman in front of him was a female warrior who lived near the tropical jungles. They generally believed in the god of storms. They were warlike, cruel, and bloodthirsty. They despised men and saw them as tools for mating, and reproduction. Some people called them Amazons. The Amazons were not only humans, but also all intelligent races that lived near the tropical forests. It was a place very similar to the Underdark. In the underground world, the female drows ruled the community with cruel means. In the tropical rainforest area, humans, centaurs, naga sirens, and so on also ruled the community with cruel means. They maintained the tradition of females being the core of their tribes. They were responsible for fighting, killing, and protecting their territory. Any males were treated as vassals. Because of the dangers in the area, the intelligent races there were very aggressive. Their population was less than 1/100th of the South's, but their combat power was much stronger. If it weren't for the fact that they were divided into countless tribes, it would be very easy for them to conquer the tropical forests and the coastal areas. The adventure level of that area was 12, which was only a little lower than the Underdark. Ogre. The female warrior held a battle spear in her hand. Her voice was cold and filled with anger, like a barrel of gunpowder that could explode at any time. Take your tribe and leave this place. Or else, I'll kill you all. The two-headed ogre had no fear in its eyes, even if the opponent was a legendary storm lord. It took out a heavy battle flag and inserted it into the ground. The flagpole was at least a few 100 pounds, and there was a strange skull pattern on it. However, the ogre didn't seem to care about its weight at all, and it inserted its hand into the ground by a few centimeters. As the distance closed, the ogre warriors gathered in front of the others. Normal ogres were about 2.4 meters tall and weighed more than 500 pounds. Their bodies were covered with fat, but they weren't bloated. Instead, their muscles were covered with a layer of fat. Their stomachs were especially fat, but the outline of their abdominal muscles could still be seen. The two-headed ogre was over 3 meters tall and looked like a small giant. The one that spoke was the left head, while the right head was silent. Its face was smeared with dark blue paint that extended from its forehead to its chest. There were runes that looked like tattoos on its thick arms, and it was wearing an animal skin cloak. Human. The two-headed ogre raised the battle flag, and the roars of other ogres echoed behind it, as if they were on drugs. It clearly didn't cast any spells, but the eyes of the other ogres were bloodshot, and the veins on their bodies bulged as they waved their weapons and roared. The dull sounds of the war drums became louder and louder. The ogres stared at the war flag in front of them with great excitement, as though they would go berserk at any moment. The two-headed ogre looked at the Whiterun army in front of him and roared, "The flag of the bone-shattering tribe has been planted on this land, and I'm not going to let you get away with this. Let the battle tell us who has the right to decide the ownership of this land." Thud. These wild beasts, which weighed close to half a ton, ran with frightening momentum. They were almost the size of a rhinoceros, and their diet included rocks and minerals. The gnolls and lizardmen slaves were driven forward, and the ogre warriors behind them waved their maces and followed closely behind. Formation. Heavy crossbowmen. The one who gave the order was a fully armored warrior. His whole body was covered in armor, and his head was covered by a steel mask. Only his powerful voice could be heard. Following his order, the Whiterun guards began to disperse. Rows of heavy infantrymen dressed in chainmail and half-body armor walked out of the encampment. Steel shields hung on their backs and long swords hung on their waists. They took out heavy crossbows from their backs and quickly reloaded them. 30 people lined up in a row, separated by about 5 meters. 5 rows intersected with a depth of 3 meters, forming a defensive line. The heavy crossbows required ordinary people to step on them to reload, but the heavy infantrymen easily loaded them with their hands. They then aimed the crossbows but did not pull the trigger. They were waiting for the commander's order. Formation. Crossbowmen. The ogres drove the ironback boars and captives toward the Whiterun army. The Whiterun army's commander did not panic. Following his order, the light infantrymen at the back spread out on both sides and aimed their crossbows at the enemy. Third Night Squad, get ready. The heavy armored cavalrymen who were fully clad in knight plate armor gathered together. They put down their knight masks and used their hands to calm the war horses under them. Then they raised their 4-meter-long knight spears and formed a standard formation of 10 people in a row with a 3-meter gap. These infantrymen were all at least grade 2 warriors, and some of them had even reached grade 3. They were the best of the best in the Whiterun army. Wizards, get ready. More than 30 golems gathered together and approached from the flanks with heavy footsteps. The whole formation formed a concave shape that looked like a pocket. The adventurers were in charge of covering the flanks. The wizards had already started casting spells to buff themselves with mage armor and shield. It was not yet time for them to make a move, and the enemies in front of them were just trash that had been driven to their deaths. Battle Hymn of Courage. Blessing. A high-spirited war song rang out, and a white-robed chanter appeared. This was the advanced class of the bards, which required the chanter to also be a priest. As his song echoed, everyone seemed to have their blood boiling. Streaks of white light appeared, and the priests began to bless the soldiers with the blessings of the gods. This would allow them to temporarily forget their fear, and even reduce their sense of pain. More than a dozen ballistae were pushed out, and the thick bolts were aimed at the enemies in front of them. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. When the distance between the two sides was less than 300 meters, the commander swung his sword and roared, "Fire!" Swoosh, swoosh. The ballista instantly pierced through an ironback wild boar, creating a bloody hole in its body. The heavy infantry in the front pulled the trigger, and the heavy bolts in their hands flew out. The lizard men and gnolls in front of them immediately fell to the ground. They calmly reloaded the bolts, and after the third round of attacks, they put down the heavy ballistae, drew their swords and raised their shields. They reduced the distance to 3 meters and began to wait in formation. The light infantry in the rear continued to fire rapidly, and the captives driven by the ogres fell one after another. They were all dead before they could even reach 100 meters. However, the thick-skinned ironback boars were still lucky enough to survive. Even though their bodies were full of bolts, they still charged forward in a frenzy. The heavy infantrymen within 50 meters of the ironback boars began to spread out and widen the distance to 5 meters. When the ironback boars charged at them, the heavy infantrymen suddenly dodged to the side and stabbed their long swords at the ironback boars' necks. Blood splattered everywhere. These heavy infantry who were grade 2 and above ignored the ironback boars and once again formed a loose formation of about 5 meters. They held their shields and swords tightly in their hands and faced the ogres in a 3-line battle formation. Supports. Kill those ironback boars. The adventurers began to attack the ironback boars that had broken through the first line of defense. These stupid beasts only knew how to move in a straight line. After the heavy infantry in the first line of defense dodged, they immediately charged back, ready to attack the light infantry in the rear. The adventurers covering the flanks had already begun to shoot. These beasts were not small in size. The second line of defense was 30 meters away, which was enough for the archers to fire a round of shots. Soren also took out his crossbow and shot an ironback boar in the head, directly receiving 500 slaughter EXP. Golems advance. The huge golems moved forward with heavy steps, facing the ogres that were charging at them from behind. After closing the distance to 70 or 80 meters, the charging ogre warriors pulled out their iron spears and threw them directly at the heavy infantry in front of them. "Get out of the way!" the commander roared. "Protect against long-range weapons." Dozens of iron spears hit the energy field, but they instantly broke through the energy shield. 7 or 8 heavy infantry who couldn't dodge in time were hit. 5 of them died on the spot, and 3 of them were knocked down by the power of the spears. They quickly staggered back up. They were equipped with steel shields, so even if they were hit by iron spears, as long as they blocked the spears with their shields, it wouldn't be fatal. However, it was obviously inconvenient for them to fight. The ogres with hundreds of pounds of heavy weapons rushed over, and the distance between them was now only 50 meters. They roared as their skin turned red, and they swung their maces fiercely. Grease. Web. Is. Strength. Stone to mud. The wizards and priests began to cast spells one after another, but they were not offensive spells. Instead, they continuously cast control spells. At the same time, they cast strength and haste on the heavy infantry in front of them. The duration of these spells was very short, and they were all calculated in minutes. A grade 3 wizard could only buff them for 10 minutes or so. Grease and Web were very ineffective against the ogres. The ogres took one step at a time, and Grease could only slightly cause them to slip, while Web was directly broken through by the ogres. It didn't slow down their charging speed at all. As the distance between them narrowed to about 30 meters, the ogres roared and began to speed up instantly. They suddenly reached the effective sprint, and they violently swung their maces at the enemy in front of them. Clang, clang, clang. The heavy infantry in the first row took a step back and steadily blocked the ogre's attacks. Strength, level 2 spell. Temporarily increases the target's strength by 4 points, up to a maximum of 25 points. Duration is spell power x 1 minute. Whiteran's battle formation was a bit similar to the semi-loose formation of the Romans, with 3 to 5 lines of defense spaced at a certain distance from each other, unlike the tight formation of the Greeks. Their weapons were mainly short swords and long swords, paired with crossbows and shields. They basically didn't use long weapons such as spears. Chapter 82. Ogres had a creature level of 5, and they were naturally grade 2 intelligent creatures. If they succeeded in evolving, their strength would be a combination of their creature level and their class level. Although the ogres were only grade 2 or grade 3 warriors, and their techniques were far inferior to humans, their overall strength was still higher than the Whiterun army. The ogres' innate strength allowed them to rampage as soon as they entered the front line. The heavy infantrymen who had been buffed with strength and brute strength were barely able to stop the ogres, but the same could not be said for the rest of the Whiterun army. The first line of defense was in a state of chaos. The ogres at the front line fell one after another. In just a few breaths, 30 of them had been killed by crossbow bolts. However, the Whiterun army also suffered heavy casualties. Most of the light infantrymen who were unlucky enough to be hit by the spiked clubs were killed on the spot, and the lucky ones had their limbs broken. There was a limit to how many spells the wizards could cast. Most of them were concentrated on the stronger heavy infantrymen, and the light infantrymen could not stop the ogre's charge at all. Steady, steady. The commander in full plate armor roared. He pointed his sword forward and shouted, "Whiterun Elite Legion, attack!" Heavy footsteps were heard. The second line of heavy infantrymen began to advance. They were all wearing full plate armor, but they did not use shields. They were armed with a variety of weapons. Some used two-handed swords, some used long swords, and some used special weapons such as flails, spiked hammers, and giant scythes. They were all grade 3 warriors with a profession level of 10 and above. They did not need any spell buffs. They roared and charged at the ogres in front of them. Clang, 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 clang. The heavy infantrymen easily blocked the ogres' attacks and fought them head-on without fear. Their armored figures were as agile as ever, dodging the ogres' ferocious attacks while looking for a chance to hit the ogres' weak points. 10 profession levels meant 5 free attribute points, so they were not much weaker than the ogres. The only downside was that there were only 70 or 80 of them. However, as they joined the battle, the first line of defense was quickly stabilized. Fatal attack? Soren continued to fire with his crossbow. He took some time to look at the battlefield. There were 3 to 5 people who were very conspicuous on the battlefield. Wherever they went, the ground was littered with ogre corpses. In just a few minutes, more than 10 ogres had fallen under their swords. These were the only class 3 warriors who weren't wearing armor. Their movements were abnormally nimble, and the straight blades in their hands cut through the ogre's vitals in an instant. Tier 3 Sword Saint. As an advanced profession that was extremely violent and even more dangerous than berserkers, these Sword Saint humans were simply killing machines. 5 or 6 heavy infantrymen guarded the sacred swordsman's left and right sides. When they attacked together, they blocked the enemies from the sides and behind them. Sword Saints were very weak. They didn't even have a single piece of leather armor on them. As long as they were hit by the enemy, they would die on the spot. Soren shot an ogre in the eye. The crossbow bolt pierced through the front and killed the enemy in an instant. Ogres gave a lot of slaughter EXP. This was just an ordinary ogre warrior, but he already received 800 points of slaughter express. If it was an advanced ogre warrior, the amount of slaughter EXP he received would be comparable to the snake demon from the abyss. Lightning Spear. An ogre warlord in full armor seemed to have discovered these dangerous enemies. It roared and threw an iron spear in the direction of the sacred swordsman. The ogre warriors rushed up from behind. They roared and threw their iron spears at the enemy. The iron spears pierced through the air with a sharp whistle, killing 5 warriors on the spot. One of them couldn't dodge in time and had his leg pierced by the spear. Before the others could help, the ogre warlord pounced over with a sinister smile and swung his heavy mace down. Like a watermelon, the sacred swordsman's head instantly shattered. Powerful but also weak. A sacred swordsman who had almost completely given up on armor would easily become the focus of the enemy in a large-scale battle like this. They were simply too conspicuous. The ogre warlord had 3 iron spears in total. After 2 rounds of overdraft, most of their ammunition had been used up. As the distance between them and the ogre warlord got closer, it roared and led a group of warriors with strange paint to charge at the wizards in the rear. These weak spellcasters were just as dangerous. The iron spears they threw had a range of almost 100 meters. As long as they could break through the first line of defense, they could attack the wizards in the rear. Mage armor couldn't block these heavy weapons. As long as one of the iron spears hit them, it would break their mage armor and shield. These ogres were monsters that didn't play by the rules. Some of the ogres on the front line couldn't break through, so they gave up on the enemies in front of them and charged at the adventurers on the flanks. Curses could be heard everywhere. Many of the adventurers had no choice but to draw their weapons and block the ogres. After activating bloodthirsty rage, the ogres had completely lost their minds. Apart from not attacking their own kind, anyone else could become their target. As they fought, the ogres lost their sense of direction and rampaged through the crowd for a while. Some of them pounced on the light infantry while others pounced on the adventurers. Boom. It was like a muffled thunder. The legendary Storm Lord finally couldn't take it anymore. She took out a short spear and threw it out. A flash of lightning appeared on it and instantly nailed an ogre warrior to death. A fierce figure flew out, completely beyond the range of a normal human. The Storm Lord's spear flashed with lightning, and the ogres in front of her fell like wheat being cut. Almost all of them were killed in one blow, and there were traces of lightning burns on their wounds. The strength of a legendary profession was undoubtedly displayed at this moment. In the blink of an eye, 7 or 8 ogres were killed. The frantic sound of war drums reverberated. The ogre shaman roared to the sky, pulled out a giant bone stick from behind, and stepped heavily into the battlefield. The two-headed ogre, who had not moved for a long time, finally began to move. Its 2 heads began to cast spells at the same time, and each of its hands was holding a heavy axe. It rushed toward the Storm Lord in front of it. The brilliance of spells emerged, and the skin of the two-headed ogre became like stone. Its speed doubled in an instant, and it waved its axe and split a heavy infantry on the spot. Fireball. Bursting flame. Dragon strength. Haste. The casting speed of the two-headed ogre was several times faster than the human wizards. A fireball exploded in the formation of the light infantry. Even if they scattered and advanced to avoid it, more than a dozen people fell to the ground and most of them were dead. After blessing itself with dragon strength, the two-headed ogre's strength broke through the sky. With a swing of its axe, even the steel shield was deformed. When the first round of spells was over, the other wizards barely managed to complete their spells and used counterspell to interrupt the greater haste. However, it was obvious that 2 or 3 wizards were pale, and traces of blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. This was a sign that their counterspell had failed, and they were severely injured. Their intelligence was not as good as the two-headed ogre wizard in front of them. The Whiterun army fell to the ground like wheat being harvested. It took less than 2 minutes for the two-headed ogre to join the battle, and hundreds of people were killed or injured. It doesn't have many spell slots left. Soren's pupils shrank slightly. He pulled out his curved sword and slashed at the back of an ogre. Wizards had limited spell slots. The two-headed ogre's casting speed was very fast, but its spell slots were also very fast. The continuous casting of spells just now had consumed at least half of its spell slots. Fly. The ogre warrior was very fast. It broke through the defense line in front of it and rushed toward the wizards at the back. With a series of spells, the wizard's figure flew into the air. The duration of the flight spell was very short. 1 point of spell power could only last for 1 minute. If one didn't have a special spellcasting ability while flying, the flexibility and spellcasting ability would plummet. This was because they needed to maintain fly at the same time. Cavalry charge. The opportunity on the battlefield was fleeting. The ogres threw their iron spears, and the wizards either cast defensive spells, flew into the air, or teleported away. They used all sorts of methods to avoid the spears. Only 1 or 2 unlucky wizards were hit by the spears at the same time. One of them, who had offended the goddess of luck, was pierced through the chest by an iron spear after teleporting 50 feet away. The range of low-grade spells was not more than 500 feet, and the wizards were only 200 or 300 meters away from the battlefield. Hold monster. Charm monster. Invisibility. Flame arrow, acid arrow, frost spear transformation. The wizards finally began to cast their spells. Based on their specializations, they used all sorts of methods to attack. Half of the ogres at the front fell to the ground with a whoosh. Their tenacious vitality allowed many ogres to resist the spells and charge forward. Their bodies had already been burnt black, but they could still furiously swing their spiked clubs. The heavy sound of the cavalry's hooves was heard. The Whiterun knights put down their spears and urged their horses to charge from the side. Accompanied by the dull sound of hooves, the heavy cavalry gradually scattered. When they rushed toward the enemy in front of them, they staggered about 2 meters away. The powerful force of the knight's spear pierced through the ogres. When the spear hit the enemy, it broke automatically, leaving half of the spear in the ogre's body. It was impossible to charge head-on because the horses would automatically dodge, and the knights would not be able to withstand the reaction force. In order to reduce the force of the recoil, most of the knights' spears were very brittle and would break at the same time. Otherwise, the recoil force would throw the knights off their horses. Asterisk clang. Asterisk they pulled out their long swords, turned their horses around and charged. The moment they passed by the ogres, they swung their swords horizontally. The ogres' maces almost brushed past their armor, and then fell weakly to the ground because there was a shocking wound on their chest. The ogres' horses whined in pain. They were only grazed by the ogres, but the horses broke on the spot and threw the knights off. The knights on the horses turned over and jumped up, holding their shields and swords tightly, and blocked the second attack head-on. P.S. The spears used by infantry can only be used for stabbing in the hands of knights, and the recoil force of a head-on collision can throw them off. A real knight's spear is a one-time consumable. The front part is made of iron, and the middle part is made of brittle wood. The spear will break instantly after being hit, and at the same time reduce the recoil force. A dense formation charging head-on is even more misleading. Knights' attacks are dislocated, slashing and stabbing. Heavy cavalry rarely charge head-on, and they are more likely to charge from the side or from the rear because both the horses and the men are flesh and blood. Chapter 83. Lance Charge. This was the most lethal move in the era of cold weapons. If a Tier 2 knight successfully used Mount Rush to hit his target, he could directly kill a Tier 4 warrior. Even if it was a legendary warrior, if they did not have the protection of extraordinary equipment, they would still have a hole in their body. As for whether they would die or not, it would depend on their luck. If they were hit in the heart, they would certainly die. No one would be reckless enough to take a lance charge head-on. Even a grade 3 knight could create a bloody hole in a dragon's body. Lance charge was one of the most difficult combat skills to master. 3 to 5 prerequisites were required. Not only did it require a good grasp of the lance, but it also required an excellent horse and the ability to control it. Because if you didn't grasp the moment of misalignment, any bit of attack under the full speed of the warhorse would cause serious damage to you. It would be better if you were thrown off the warhorse, but if you were unlucky you would die instantly. Lance charge. The number of knights was reduced by 6. 5 of them were thrown off their horses, 1 died on the spot, and only 3 of them were still able to fight. However, the damage dealt was 10 times more. All the ogres that were hit either died on the spot or had their bodies pierced through. Most of them had lost their ability to fight. It was just a round of attacks, but at the cost of 2 dead and 3 injured, they had taken out 40 to 50 ogres. Many of them were ogre warriors. The number of ogres that had died at the beginning was greatly reduced, and the pressure on the front line was greatly reduced. The light infantry had used up a lot of their ammunition. As the two sides entered a state of close combat, they put down their crossbows and took out their short swords to fight. The Whiterun army had suffered heavy casualties. Hundreds of people died on the spot and many more were seriously injured. Almost 1/3 of the ogres had died. The main casualties were from the front line's attacks, the wizard's spells and the knight's charge. The light infantry shot many times, but the arrows did not have much effect on the ogres who had thick skin and some armor. If the arrows did not hit their vitals, they could just pull out their crossbows and continue fighting. On the other side, the two-headed ogre destroyed 3 golems in a row. Its fireball landed among the knights, and the violent explosion sent more than 10 people flying. One of the knights twisted his body and hid beside his horse. The warhorse was blown into a bloody mess on the spot, and the knight was also crushed by the warhorse's corpse. One of his arms was twisted, and it looked like the bones were broken. Clang. A war spear fell from the sky. The Storm Lord's vigorous figure landed on the ground and swept the spear towards the two-headed ogre in front of it. The two-headed ogre's heavy battle axe cracked. Its left head frowned and swung its left arm at the enemy in front of it. Its right head chanted a spell, and a flame fell on the Storm Lord's body. In less than a second, the casting of the spell was completed. The right head also controlled the body to swing the battle axe, directly slashing at the enemy's waist. Clang, clang. The Storm Lord brandished her spear, creating a raging wind. However, every time she blocked, she would take a step back. The expression on her face became angrier and angrier. Her opponent's strength was clearly much higher than hers. After a series of attacks, her figure retreated more than 10 steps, and the hand holding the spear trembled slightly. However, the two-headed ogre in front of her wasn't having a good time either. Arcs of electricity were jumping around its body, and its weapon had been inflicted with lightning damage. A light of magic appeared. The ogre shaman waved the skull club and cast a spell on the two-headed ogre. At the same time he quickly chanted a spell. Arcs of electricity began to jump in the air, and a faint light appeared. Summon lightning. The ogre warriors were also hit by the electric arcs, but they only paused for a moment before continuing to attack. However, the other human warriors were hit by the electric arcs, and their bodies were obviously paralyzed for a moment. In an instant, 5 or 6 warriors fell to the ground. Their whole body was covered in metal armor, so their resistance to lightning was very poor. The scattered electric arcs didn't cause fatal damage, but the effect brought about by the Whiterun guards was not small. Elemental resistance. The wizards and priests began to cast spells, shooting out a large number of fire arrows and acid arrows. Large-scale attacks ignored the enemy, and wizards rarely memorized a large number of turret-type spells. 1/3 of the spells they memorized were used to save their lives, 1/3 were used to assist in control, and the last 1/3 were the real killing spells. A wizard who memorized all the killing spells would definitely die faster than anyone else on the battlefield. Their precious spell slots continued to be depleted. Grade 2 wizards had already used up most of their spells. A level 5 wizard could only memorize one Circle 3 spell. Although they were 2 or 3 levels higher, they still had very few Circle 3 spells. In a one-on-one battle, their spells were obviously very lethal. However, on the battlefield, 1 or 2 fireballs wouldn't be able to solve the problem. Even if a small number of ogres were killed, there would still be more nearby. These wizards had memorized a large number of protection and control spells. Asilar. The Storm Lord took 15 steps back in a row. The anger in her eyes was getting stronger and stronger. Suddenly, she let out a roar, and the muscles all over her body expanded as if they were inflated with air. Accompanied by the sound of bones cracking, her body grew to about 2 meters tall. Because she was a female, the outline of her muscles didn't look that exaggerated, but it was still full of deadly power. A barbarian? No one would have thought that the female warrior in front of them was actually a barbarian who had evolved into a Storm Lord. With a low roar, she blocked the two-headed ogre's attack head-on. At the same time, she twisted her battle spear and slashed a bloody wound on the ogre's chest. The ogre's tough skin was buffed with stone skin, and its protective energy was shattered. The 150 points of stone skin was broken by the Storm Lord's attack. Streaks of lightning danced on her palms and body, and a dark cloud appeared in the sky. Rumble. The dull sound of thunder echoed across the earth, and many people stopped in their tracks. The Storm Lord's eyes were filled with bloodlust. The desire to kill made her extremely fanatical. The Storm Lord's lightning storm was originally a chaotic energy, and it further strengthened her berserk effect. Her mind was obviously affected. The people around her began to retreat. Even the Whiterun army retreated dozens of meters away. When a legendary Storm Lord went berserk, everyone could be affected. "I'm going to cut off your head." The Storm Lord walked forward with heavy steps. Lightning danced around her body, and her vigorous body was like the embodiment of a storm. She stared at the enemy in front of her and said in a deep voice, "Your head will be my trophy. I'll marinate it and hang it in my room." The two-headed ogre roared and quickly buffed himself with a spell. Then, a bloodthirsty light appeared in its eyes. Its muscles bulged and twisted veins appeared on its body. It roared, "The descendant of the Dragon Slayer is fearless. I'll kill you. Your flesh and blood can give me even more power." Bloodthirsty berserk. The two-headed ogre's momentum skyrocketed. At the same time, with the activation of the berserk ability, it temporarily lost the ability to cast spells. No class could cast spells while in the berserk state. Because the berserk power had interfered with their minds, their melee ability had increased exponentially, but they could no longer focus on casting any spells. The Storm Lord in front of them was a legendary class, but the two-headed ogre was also a legendary monster. In addition to its powerful spellcasting ability, it was also a terrifying berserk warrior. On the other side of the battlefield, the golems stepped with heavy steps to support the flanks, while the light infantry spread out to distract the enemies in front of them. The battle on the front was still ongoing, and the casualties of the adventurers were gradually increasing. Next to Soren, an unlucky rogue was smashed into a meat patty on the spot. He and Yar stood back to back and covered each other, relying on their agile movements to dodge the attacks of the ogre. Both sides had already killed 5 or 6 ogres, and Soren had obtained nearly 3,000 slaughter EXP. It was a taboo to show off too much in a large-scale battle like this. If he was attacked by 2 ogres at the same time, there was a 50% chance that he would die here. The sword saints who attracted the most attention at the beginning were all dead. They were the priority targets to become ogre warriors, and they disappeared like brilliant fireworks. Their deaths showed the powerful combat strength of the Sword Saints, but also their fragile survival ability. The outcome of the battle was not important. At the very least, it was not important to Soren. The commander of the Whiterun army should be the one who cared about the outcome of the battle. Right now, he was just a mercenary who was responsible for completing his mission and killing as many enemies as possible while minimizing the danger. Some ogres nearby rushed into the formation of the light infantry and began slaughtering them. Occasionally, more honest adventurers would come to their rescue. However, Soren and Yars did not move. The half-elf ranger circled around with a boning knife and occasionally shot the ogre's legs with his longbow. It was impossible to kill the armored ogres in one hit, so attacking their legs would affect their combat strength. The safest way was to cooperate with Soren to kill them. Perhaps it was because they were too good at cooperating. The heavily armored ogre warlord had killed one of the light infantry in the rear and was charging at them with bloodshot eyes. The ogre warlord, who had entered a berserk state, had listed them as targets to kill. Two-headed ogre wizard, Groll, level 8 two-headed ogre / level 11 wizard / level 4 berserker. Strength 24, plus 6 dragon strength, agility 16, plus 4 haste, constitution 20, intelligence 21, wisdom 9, charm 14. Chapter 84. Bang. The heavy bone crusher mace whistled through the air. Soren rolled to the side to avoid it, but at the same time he slashed at the back of the ogre warlord's leg with his curved sword. It felt as if he had slashed at a piece of tough leather. The ogre warlord's attack didn't stop at all, as if it hadn't been injured in the slightest. Its entire body was covered in heavy armor. Apart from its arms, legs, and the gaps in the armor, it was useless to hit any other part of its body. A whistling sound came from above, accompanied by a foul stench. The smell of an ogre was even worse than that of a gnoll. Soren didn't dare to stop for even a moment. After rolling to the side, he quickly retreated, putting 7 or 8 meters between himself and the ogre warlord. The half-elf ranger took advantage of this opportunity and quickly knocked an arrow on his bow. The arrow was aimed at the ogre warlord's head. The ogre warlord clenched its fist and held it in front of its eyes. The arrow hit its wrist guard and bounced off with a clang. Yas cursed under his breath. He pulled out another arrow and aimed, but the ogre warlord had already let out a furious roar and charged at him. Clang. A crisp sound of something breaking could be heard. Yas didn't have time to pull out his weapon to block the attack. He quickly shot an arrow and tried to dodge, but it was already too late. He could only raise his longbow to block the attack. The bow broke in an instant, and the bone crusher mace landed on his chest. His ribs caved in and blood spurted out. In the blink of an eye, his chest was covered in blood. The arrow hit the ogre warlord's neck, but it didn't hit its throat. It went through the side of its body. Die. Soren growled, took a deep breath and jumped up. The moment the ogre warlord hit the half-elf ranger, he swung his sword at the ogre warlord's neck. The tough skin was cut open by the curved sword, but when it hit the bone it was stuck in the ground. The ogre warlord roared angrily and threw a punch at Soren. The ogre warlord was wearing a spiked wrist guard, and the heavy force sent Soren flying. Crack. Soren's right arm had been fractured. The spikes on his bracers had pierced through his shoulder, causing his right arm to bleed profusely. Soren's right arm was in pain and numbness. Perhaps it was because his tendons were injured, but he couldn't use any strength in his arm. He rolled back in a rather embarrassing manner, and when he stood up, he retreated into the distance. It was impossible for him to kill an ogre warlord with just one arm. The bones in his arm were most likely broken, and it would be very difficult for him to even fight. The ogre warlord roared as it pulled out its scimitar, but blood spurted out crazily. Its speed slowed down by half a beat and a large amount of blood gushed out. Half of its body was covered in blood. It hit the artery. Soren's face lit up. He grabbed a short sword from the battlefield and threw it over. The enraged ogre warlord rushed over once more. As it moved, blood gushed out even faster. It was only a distance of 30 to 50 steps, but its speed was getting slower and slower. Blood splattered behind it. When it roared and wanted to swing its weapon, its huge body suddenly stiffened, and then it fell to the ground in a dispirited manner. It didn't die immediately due to the severe blood loss, but its grip on its weapon loosened. Soren staggered over. After confirming that the ogre warlord's breath was getting weaker, he pulled out his dagger and stabbed it into its eye socket. A row of data appeared, successfully hit a vital point. 21 piercing damage dealt to target. Target killed. Successfully killed Ogre Warlord. Extracting soul energy from target. Received 2400 slaughter EXP. It was a grade 3 Ogre Warlord that was close to grade 4. The slaughter EXP it gave was even higher than the snake demon from the abyss. Soren gasped for breath and looked around vigilantly. He then quickly took out a bandage and wrapped up his crippled right arm. If he continued to lose blood, even with his regenerative abilities, he would become extremely weak from the blood loss. He might even lose his life. He rested for a few dozen seconds before approaching the half-elf. Yas was already dead. His chest was completely caved in. Less than 10 seconds after he was hit, he was already dead. May your soul rest in peace. There was a hint of sadness in Sauron's expression. Although they were not very familiar with each other, they had fought side by side. He reached out and closed the half-elf's eyes. He then took out his multidimensional bag and put some useful items on himself. The battle wasn't over yet, but he had already lost the ability to fight. He looked at the battlefield, wiped the blood off his face and quickly retreated. He didn't stop until he was more than 100 meters away. Soren took out a bottle of healing potion and poured it into his mouth. He then gritted his teeth and forced the broken bone back. With a groan, the broken bone reconnected to its original position, but he still couldn't exert any strength. Level up, wizard. After so many battles, Soren had accumulated more than 9,000 slaughter EXP. As he allocated the EXP to his wizard level, a series of data appeared in front of his eyes. Wizard level up to level 5. Received 25 INT 20 plus INT 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5 skill points, HP increased by 9, profession HP 4 plus, con 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Learned profession skill, counterspell. Received 1 talent point. The increase in his HP had significantly reduced his injuries. He could finally move his right arm a little. He stood up and looked in front of him. The ogres had already broken through the Wyvern's defensive line. Under their brute force, the battlefield had turned into a small skirmish. Fortunately, the long-term training was still effective. Although the formation of the army was disrupted, they still maintained a small circular formation of 5 to 10 people. The injuries of the ogres had accumulated to a certain extent, and even their strong vitality could not prevent their fates from gradually collapsing. On the other side of the battlefield, the wizard's concentrated firepower had already killed the ogre warriors. The acid arrows and flame arrows had a strong penetrating effect. With a small number of golems supporting the flanks, the ogres on both sides of the battlefield were gradually falling apart. The ogres' bloodthirsty and violent power gradually subsided, and the number of ogres began to decrease sharply. It seemed that some ogres had already fled the battlefield due to the collapse of morale. The Storm Lord gradually gained the upper hand in the battle against the two-headed ogres. The commander of the Whiterun army cooperated with the knights to attack the ogres from the rear. The dark clouds in the sky were getting lower and lower. Following the Storm Lord's roar, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down. However, it wasn't aimed at the two-headed ogre in front of her. Instead, it landed directly on the Storm Lord's spear. Lightning weapon. The crackling lightning surrounded the Storm Lord's spear, and the burst of light almost blocked the vision. She looked like she was fighting with lightning in her hand. Mixed with wild roars, she attacked faster and faster, and her whole body was surrounded by lightning. Occasionally there would be people nearby who approached her, but almost as soon as they were within 30 meters of her, they would immediately stand still and tremble strangely, as if their whole body had been electrocuted. Static field, legendary force field. Soren was very familiar with the scene in front of him. When he activated Shadow Field, it had the same effect. The two-headed ogre wizard's speed became slower and slower. With a momentary mistake, the Storm Lord's spear pierced through its chest, and a bloody wound with a diameter of 5 centimeters appeared. The flesh around the wound was burned by the lightning. With a miserable howl, the ogre wizard suddenly threw away its opponent in front of it. Its two heads madly cast spells, and in an instant, it disappeared and reappeared hundreds of meters away. It was a wizard's teleportation spell. It was ready to escape. Lightning spear. The jumping lightning condensed on the spear, and the Storm Lord roared angrily. She jumped to a height of hundreds of meters, and the storm lifted her figure. She held the spear tightly and threw it at the two-headed ogre in front of her. The spear was like a flash of lightning across the sky, and its speed was beyond human vision. The next moment, a big bloody hole was opened in the two-headed ogre's chest. Plop. The two-headed ogre's huge body fell to the ground, and the Storm Lord slowly landed. Her breathing was a little messy and she looked very tired. Her hands seemed to be burned, and the skin on her arms was scorched black. The ogres finally collapsed on a large scale. When the two-headed ogre fell to the ground, many of them began to run away. The Storm Lord walked forward with heavy steps. He did not chase after the fleeing ogres. Instead, he arrived before the corpse of the two-headed ogre adept and drew a short knife from his waist. He then cut off the two slightly charred heads of the two-headed ogre adept. Streams of blood splattered everywhere. She put the two heads in a cloth bag, nodded with satisfaction, and then looked back at the battlefield. The ogres had completely collapsed. The cavalry pursued as much as they could, and many tired soldiers fell to the ground. The wails of the wounded could be heard everywhere. The priests were using their limited number of spells to heal the wounded. For those who were seriously injured, the others could only give them a quick death. Hundreds of ogre corpses were left on the battlefield, and the Whiterun army also suffered heavy losses. Some soldiers who were still in good condition pulled out their weapons and cut off the ogres' heads one by one. These were their most important trophies and also the most important trophies for Whiterun. These heads and corpses would be sent back to the city, not only to show their achievements, but also to deter the surrounding enemies. The heads of the ogres would be pickled and hung in many places. In the coming days, they would serve as a warning to nearby enemies who intended to provoke Whiterun and what the consequences of challenging them would be. If there were no accidents, the nearby races would not easily set foot in Whiterun's territory, because they had to first consider whether they could defeat a powerful ogre tribe. This battle would soon be told by bards, and it would not be long before all kinds of stories were told in taverns. Of course, the main character of the story was not Soren. Perhaps one day he would become the main character of a legendary story, but for now he was just an insignificant adventurer. A row of data appeared. The battle is over. You have successfully assisted the Whiterun army in defeating the bone-crushing ogre tribe. Your skills have improved. Detect +5, Search +5, Sneak +2, Survival +2, Parry +2, Evasion Roll +1, Evasion Shift +1, Listen +1, Heal +1. You have obtained 1 legendary point, Folk Legendary, for participating in a legendary battle. Chapter 85. Legendary Rating. Soren looked at his status page and saw that there was indeed a new line of legendary rating. It showed that he had 1 legendary rating. Legendary rating had a special function and was very difficult to obtain. However, it did not increase one's strength by much. Its biggest use at the moment was its ability to influence negotiations, deceive, and intimidate. 1 legendary rating could be used as 1 basic skill point. Only after entering the legendary realm would legend points truly begin to take effect. It was a very important and decisive factor. Soren looked at the battlefield in front of him. Suddenly, a row of data appeared. Battle record unlocked. Battle record automatically calculated. Simulation data activated. Before Soren could react, a new row of data had been generated which showed Battle of the Bone Crusher Ogres, Legendary Battle. September 1675, New Moon Era, Whiterun City, Southern Principality launched a battle to expel the Bone Crusher Ogres. You assisted the Whiterun army in defeating the Bone Crusher Ogres and killed an advanced ogre warlord, level 14, on the battlefield. The story of this battle will gradually spread. In time, the entire South will know about this legendary battle. Legendary rating +1. The soldiers began to clean up the battlefield. Whiterun City had more than 600 casualties. War always came with a price, but these professional soldiers did not have time to grieve. After a short rest, they began to collect the corpses. The corpses of their comrades had to be brought back in one piece. Those who were missing an arm or a leg had to be recovered as much as possible. They had to give these brave soldiers a proper burial. The wounded had to be sent back for treatment. The priest's divine spells were limited, and the cost of casting high-grade divine spells was high. The lifespan of a legendary priest was far shorter than that of other spellcasters. Legendary wizards could easily live for hundreds or even thousands of years, but a legendary priest could only live for less than 100 or 200 years. Even Droll could easily live for hundreds of years. Both of them used divine spells, so there had to be a reason for the difference in lifespan. It was just that not many people pointed out the reason. After all, for a true priest, returning to the embrace of the god they believed in was also a path that they had to go through. The casualties of the adventurers were also not small. Most of the people who came were slightly injured. Those who had teammates would help them collect their corpses. Those who did not have teammates would be cremated on the spot and buried nearby. Cremation was the responsibility of adventurers. It didn't mean that they couldn't be buried. In fact, the people of this era also attached great importance to burials. However, there were too many scavengers in the wilderness. If they were buried in the wilderness today, they could be dug up and eaten clean the next day. Therefore, most of the people who died in the wilderness were cremated. After all, these corpses should not have been eaten by wild beasts. This was definitely an ending that they did not deserve. With the help of the others, Soren cremated the half-elf ranger's body, wrapped the ashes in a piece of cloth, and buried them in a hole. He didn't know what kind of epitaph he should write, but after all, the other party was a Tier 3 ranger. Such a person shouldn't die in obscurity. At the very least, there should be a tombstone. He chopped down a piece of wood and used his machete to carve some words on it. First, he carved his name, then he thought about what he should leave behind. Yes. A brave half-elf ranger. Defender of the Battle of Grey Hill. Slayer of the ogres. At the last moment of his life, he defeated an ogre warlord. May his soul rest in peace. Soren really couldn't think of anything to write. So, he simply left a few words on the tombstone, then put the broken longbow and machete into the grave. Weapons were a warrior's second life. These equipment should be buried with him. It might be a bit of a waste, but it was a tradition of this world. Sometimes traditions should be respected. Just like the warriors of Whiterun, those who died in battle were buried with their weapons and armor. City Hall had disagreements with the army over this matter more than once. The politicians thought that it was a shameful waste, and that the equipment should be taken back and given to new soldiers. However, the army always stubbornly refused. Some people with bad tempers even fought over it. There was no reason to argue. They stubbornly believed that the equipment they used when they were alive should be buried with them. If they died in battle in the future, the weapons and armor buried with them would be better than any gold, silver, or jewelry. Perhaps this was the warrior's stubbornness. It took a long time to clean up the battlefield, and the injured were sent back to Whiterun. A lot of loot was found in the ogre fortress, but it didn't have much to do with Soren. At most, the adventurers would get another reward later. The unfinished fortress was covered in flames. In order to prevent other creatures from occupying it, the commander ordered everything to be torn down and burned to the ground. Soren returned with the rest of the team. The others also had some simple battles, such as the lizard men that migrated from the Black Swamp. If they knew that the ogre tribe had been destroyed, they might retreat to other places. If they didn't know, the Whiterun army would drive them away. It was obviously much easier to deal with the lizard men. About 500 to 600 soldiers were enough. The journey back was relatively quiet. After defeating the ogres, the rest was not a problem. Even if there were some scattered monsters, the guards of the other caravans could deal with them. On the way back to Whiterun, the army was greeted with cheers and cheers. From time to time, civilians would gather on the roads near the towns and villages to watch, pointing at the ogre corpses and exclaiming in amazement. These monsters with arms as thick as their thighs were not common. The civilians near the city rarely encountered gnolls, and at most they would occasionally see goblins and kobolds. After all, gnolls were very dangerous. If they were found to be active near the territory, the garrison's militia and army would be dispatched very quickly. The soldiers who were less injured walked with their heads held high. This was their moment of glory. Their strength, their bravery, and their sacrifice had created a relatively safe living environment near Whiterun. This was the mission they had to accept. Since there were sacrifices in battle, there should be glory after victory. As the army gradually approached Whiterun, the cheering crowd also became more and more sorrowful. The soldiers were selected from the nearby towns and villages. With so many casualties, many people had lost their husbands and sons. Soren was silent throughout the journey. He just watched quietly as if he was a bystander. He watched as the surviving soldiers hugged their loved ones, and he also watched as the elderly parents hugged their sons' corpses and cried bitterly. This was a very common thing. War did not necessarily bring wealth, but it would definitely leave behind pain. Perhaps it was because he had seen too much in the past, but now he was not as emotional. Whiterun gave him an extra 50 Kindler coins as a reward. It seemed that there were a lot of valuable spoils in the ogre fortress this time. For cooperating with Whiterun, the city hall also gave him a medal. If he wanted to, he could become a citizen of Whiterun and settle down here. The medal was a bronze medal, and it was more of a symbol than anything else. After receiving his reward, Soren left and casually threw the medal into his multidimensional bag. He had received hundreds of such medals in the past, and there was no lack of noble medals among them. If he accepted, he could become an honorary lord. Although it would bring him benefits and power, he would also have to fulfill his mission. It was equivalent to joining a faction. After returning to Whiterun, Soren first handed over his mission. Due to the difficulty of defeating the ogres, his mercenary rank was raised to E, and he did not receive any additional rewards. The mercenary union only recognized his strength. After taking care of some miscellaneous matters, he went to find a doctor. The broken bone in his right arm needed to be properly reattached. After all, his medical skills were not high. After the bone was properly reattached, Soren went to the temple district and spent 30 Kindler coins to ask a priest to cast medium heal on him. Naturally, reattached bones could leave behind hidden injuries, so it was best to heal them with a divine spell. This way it would not affect his future battles. When he saw Vivian the next morning, a smile finally appeared on Soren's face. He picked up the little girl and spun her around in the air. As Vivian giggled, he kissed her pink cheeks. He did not know if it was an illusion or not. The little girl was slightly chubbier than before, and she no longer looked skinny and small. Her rosy cheeks had a hint of baby fat, which made her look very cute. The mistress of the caravan looked at him deeply. The news of Whiterun sending out an army had spread for many days, and many people were very concerned about the outcome of the battle. The Soren in front of her was clearly different from when she first met him. His aura seemed sharper and more stable, and he seemed to be much stronger than before. If he used to look like a violent gang member, he now looked like a warrior who had been on the battlefield and had experienced bloodshed. The more people he killed, the stronger his aura became. Soren looked at Gloria in front of him and nodded with a smile. Although he did not say anything, the mistress of the caravan knew that he wanted to leave with Vivian. She sighed. She did not know why Soren was so stubborn about leaving. During this period of time, she had learned a lot from Vivian. She knew that they were orphans. She really couldn't understand why a human with a little bit of half-elf blood would insist on going to the territory of those arrogant elves. After all, the elves were very xenophobic and didn't like real half-elves. In the end, she decided to try again. However, it was not Soren in front of her. Instead, she looked at Vivian. This little girl was very smart. Although she looked innocent and cute, she was not ignorant. It was just that the chaos in the slums did not affect her pure heart. This was a very rare and precious quality. A pure heart represented a pure soul. The strength of her heart could help her go further. P.S. An epitaph or something like that, it won't be written very sentimentally. Chapter 87. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Natalia ran as fast as she could, and the scenery around her flashed by quickly. When a rock appeared in front of her, she jumped onto it and sat down in a sorry state. Blood dripped down from her chest, from her collarbone all the way to her chest. A hideous cut had almost cut her right breast in half. There was a scar on her beautiful face that extended from her lips to her chin. It ruined her overall beauty, but also added a hint of valiance. Bastard. She took off the leather armor in front of her chest and cursed when she saw her breasts. Murderer. Lunatic. The cut almost reached her ribs. If the wound went any deeper, it would have hurt her heart. She gritted her teeth and took out a silver needle to sew up the wound. Then she raised her hand and cast a faint light. The cut flesh quickly regenerated. On her back and arms, there were many small blood stains. Her fair arms seemed to have been cut by extremely thin threads and were covered with dense blood stains. There was a bloody wound on her plump buttocks, which seemed to have been pierced by some short weapon. Natalia groaned in pain. She wrapped the wound with a bandage and stood up again. Her tenacious vitality allowed her to keep fighting. She looked behind her with a slightly frightened gaze, then continued to run into the distance. As if she had been enchanted with some kind of spell, her running speed was extremely fast. She jumped over the slightest obstacles. Trees and rocks flew past her. She didn't know how far she had run. She only stopped when her stamina started to run out. Tsk tisk. A voice filled with an evil aura sounded. A figure appeared in the hazy shadows. It was impossible to see his face clearly. Only a pair of light red eyes could be seen. His figure was shrouded in darkness. He stood under a lush tree, his fingers playing with a small throwing knife. He said in a playful voice, "My dear sister, why aren't you running anymore?" That's it? Natalia's charming face showed a trace of fear. She instantly drew her swords from her waist and said in a trembling voice, "Who's your sister? You pervert. Murderer. Lunatic." The figure in the darkness gradually walked out. He had a devilishly handsome face and his skin was very pale, as if he was very disgusted by the sunlight. He walked to the shade of a tree and sighed. It seems that you haven't fully awakened yet. What a pathetic talent. The divine blood that Father left in your body still hasn't given you true power? Natalia stared at the man with extreme vigilance, her hands trembling as she gripped her swords. The previous battle had filled her with fear. Even though she was close to becoming a grade 4 ranger and bounty hunter, she was still no match for the man in front of her. Her teammates had all died at his hands, even though there was no grudge between them. What was even more frightening was his powerful tracking ability. Bounty hunters were originally good at tracking among rogues, not to mention that she was a ranger. But in front of him she was like a plaything. Since he couldn't discover the other party's location, he couldn't escape the other party's pursuit either. Yes, that's the expression. The corner of the man's mouth curled up in a sinister arc. He raised his hand and threw the dagger in his hand. In the next moment, a bloody mark appeared on Natalia's charming face. The dagger returned to his hand in an instant. He stared at the prey in front of him and said slowly, "That's right. This is the taste of fear. You're afraid. You're afraid. My dear sister, could it be that you still can't wake up? What a lamentable talent. Where's the bloodline power flowing in your body? Hasn't the slaughter and fear awakened your hidden soul?" Tremble. Natalia's body trembled slightly. She couldn't stand the pressure that her opponent was exerting on her. She let out a roar and pounced forward. The long sword in her hands drew a cold glint in the air, almost forming afterimages. The light from the sword fell on the man, but it was as if the air was distorted in an instant. The man's figure split into three, and then merged back into one in front of the tired Natalia. A trace of blood-red light appeared in the man's eyes. He pointed a finger at Natalia's forehead, and a strange light appeared. Abyssal fear. Time seemed to freeze in that instant. Natalia's face was filled with fear. She looked left and right in horror, as if she had seen something even more terrifying. She trembled and cried, "No. No. Go away. You're a bunch of ugly monsters. Demons." Her expression became more and more twisted. Suddenly, the fear in her heart seemed to have reached a critical point. Natalia's eyes turned blood red, and the leather armor on her back shattered in an instant, revealing her slender and beautiful naked body. Strange tattoos appeared on her skin, and her skin turned dark green. A pair of demon horns appeared on her forehead, and a pair of 3-meter-long bat wings spread out from her back. Natalia raised her head and let out a shrill cry. The sound was like a wave of air that wreaked havoc. All the beasts within a few kilometers who heard the sound fled in panic. They seemed to be running crazily as if there was a great fear behind them. Aura of fear. A pair of sharp fangs appeared at the corner of the man's mouth. A shadowy figure appeared behind him, and he sighed. "You've finally awakened. My dear sister, your will to resist fear is quite strong. Much stronger than the little brother from before. Then, the hunt should begin." A pair of black daggers appeared in the man's hands. He disappeared in an instant and then reappeared in the air. The daggers slashed through the darkness and went straight for Natalia's heart. Clang, clang. Natalia's swords turned into a series of afterimages. Her eyes were still blood-red, and she instinctively blocked the attack coming from behind. What powerful combat instincts! The bewitching man landed on the ground with slight bloodstains on his arm. He stuck out his tongue and licked the wound as if he was tasting the most delicious food. He slowly said, "If you had woken up earlier, then it would have been hard to say who would be the hunter in this game. Am I right? My dear sister?" Natalia's expression was still blank. She looked at herself helplessly, then looked at the man in front of her. "What the hell are you?" she asked slowly. "Why have I become like this?" The man's figure disappeared into thin air, but his deep voice still came from all directions. He said playfully, "It doesn't matter who I am. What's important is that you give me the divinity in your body." A figure appeared in front of her, and the dagger turned into an afterimage and went straight for her heart. Natalia crossed her swords to parry the attack. Then, with a whirlwind dance, another dark figure appeared. The dagger glowed with a vicious light. The moment the dagger hit Natalia, her body stiffened and she fell from the sky. The man twisted the dagger in his hand and crushed her heart. Then he swung the dagger horizontally and cut off a beautiful head in an instant. Streaks of strange light appeared as if they were distorted phantoms. Thud. The man's figure gently landed on the ground. He breathed as if he was intoxicated. Waves of invisible energy dissipated from Natalia's body and gradually merged into his body. When all the light disappeared, he looked coldly at the body on the ground and crushed Natalia's head with his foot. A dark flame appeared, and the headless body on the ground was burned to ashes. He looked coldly at the ground and whispered, "So, who's the next target?" "The high priest." "Why don't you know where my father's favorite daughter, my dearest sister, the witch of fear, Lillian is?" His figure gradually disappeared into the shadows and soon he disappeared without a trace. Whiterun City. A row of candles was lit in the spacious room, and there were many small trinkets on the exquisite mahogany furniture. Vivian was wearing pure white pajamas, and she was flipping through a thick book in her hand. She flipped through the pages very quickly, and after reading about a third of the book, she put it down in boredom and muttered to herself, "The customs of the North are really strange." Big Brother said that he would go to the Frost Kingdom in the future. The nobles there seem to be very xenophobic, right? The book said that it's very cold there, and there are frost giants living in many places. I wonder what they look like. The mammoths they raise must be very big. I wonder if I can reach its knees. It must be very cool to ride such a big guy. The little girl put down the book and thought for a while. Then she pulled the soft velvet quilt over her body and curled up her petite body. She sniffed her little nose and murmured, "Although it's very soft and warm, it doesn't smell like Big Brother at all. It's more comfortable to sleep next to Big Brother. Why hasn't Sister Gloria come to tell me a story today? Her story is so slow. When will the princess be taken away by the dragon? Why don't I look forward to the night defeating the dragon at all? Why do I want to see the dragon take the princess away? Big Brother should be planning to leave, right? Sister Gloria is actually very nice. I'll definitely miss her after I leave. What do elves look like? Are their ears all pointy? The book says that you can't touch an elf's ears. It's a very special place, but it should be fine if I touch it, right? I'm so cute. If I find a good-tempered elf sister to touch my ears, she won't hit me, right? Eeh. Creak. The door was gently pushed open. Gloria was wearing a light blue nightgown, like a beautiful elf in the night. She did not wear a veil in front of Vivian. Her delicate face was beautiful. She walked lightly to the corner of the bed and sat down. She leaned over and picked up the book that Vivian had thrown aside. She carefully folded a corner of the chapter that she was reading, and then gently placed it on the bookshelf beside the bed. She straightened the books that the little girl had messed up one by one. Chapter 88. Sister Gloria. Vivian got up and rested her head on Gloria's thighs. She blinked and asked, "Are we going to continue the story today?" Gloria patted the little girl's head and covered Vivian's arm with the blanket. She whispered, "Don't catch a cold. This year's autumn is much colder than before. Winter is coming soon." As a high-grade witch, Gloria was immune to both heat and cold. Her magic was constant, and she could adapt to almost any environment. However, Vivian was still a little girl and she had just started learning magic. It would be easy for her to catch a cold. Gloria closed her legs and put the little girl in a more comfortable position. She then stroked Vivian's hair and whispered, "Take a break today. I have something to tell you." The little girl nodded obediently and asked, "Is it about my brother's plan to leave?" "Very smart." Gloria nodded slightly and looked into Vivian's eyes. She then said seriously, "You're much smarter and more mature than other children. I'm sure you know that you'll encounter a lot of dangers along the way. Do you really plan to go to Autumnfall with Soren?" The little girl didn't even think about it. She put on a serious expression and said, "Of course. I'll go wherever my brother goes. Besides, I have my brother to protect me. A little danger is nothing." Gloria's expression also became serious. She then said in a low voice, "Although Soren is a skilled rogue, there are still many dangers that he can't handle. This time there are two-headed ogres in the south. Something big must have happened. It's too dangerous for the two of you to travel. Not to mention you'll have to go into the forest when you reach Autumnfall. There are many monsters that ordinary people can't handle. If Soren accidentally encounters them, he won't be able to protect himself, let alone you." Vivian faltered slightly upon hearing this before a very solemn expression appeared on her little face, and she said in a serious voice, "It's all right. I can protect my brother. I feel like I'm much stronger than before." That's not the right answer. Also, what's with that solemn expression and the sense of mission? Gloria had rehearsed the words in her heart several times in the beginning, but she couldn't say them out loud. Vivian's answer was completely beyond her expectations. Hearing the little girl's incomparably serious words, she actually didn't know what to say for a moment. Protect Soren? You're just an 8-year-old girl. She didn't know if Soren should feel relieved or ashamed after hearing this. Silly girl. Gloria rubbed Vivian's little head fiercely with her hand and seemed to be a little helpless. Then why can't you persuade Soren not to go there? You clearly know that the wilderness is dangerous, yet you still want to go so far away when you're not strong enough. Why don't you stay here or follow me to the north? You can stay by my side and continue to learn magic, and Soren won't have to take such a big risk. You don't have any relatives in the Elven Kingdom. If you go there recklessly, you'll suffer a lot. Soren cares a lot about you. If you persuade him, maybe he'll give up on the idea of going there. The little girl bit her finger with a hesitant expression. Gloria reached out and took the little girl's white finger. She patted the little girl's head and said sternly, "Don't suck your finger." Vivian giggled and stuck out her tongue. She then said seriously, "My brother must have a reason for going there, although he didn't tell me why. But my brother's decision is definitely right." Gloria was speechless. She even had the urge to beat Soren up. She said in a low voice, "No one's decision will always be right. Besides, Soren is only an adventurer. There are many things that he hasn't heard of. There are two-headed dragons, moonsaber panthers, and all kinds of strange creatures near the elven forest. It'll be very dangerous if you accidentally encounter them." The little girl turned her head away unhappily and pouted, "My brother's decision is definitely right. Even if he's wrong, he's doing it for my own good. Don't you dare say anything bad about him. My brother is the best brother in the world. He'll be the strongest brother in the future." Vivian had a solemn expression on her face. It seemed like she was even more confident than Soren that he would become a powerful person in the future. The mistress sighed helplessly again and said, "Sometimes I wonder if the two of you are biological siblings. But after seeing you like this, I really believe it. You two have the same temper." Vivian didn't say anything, but there was a hint of pride on her face. It was as if the mistress said that she and Soren were similar was something to be proud of. The mistress of the caravan didn't know how important Soren was to Vivian. He wasn't just an older brother. He was more like a father who held up the sky for her with his strong back. No one remembered what Soren used to be. In their eyes, Soren was just a taciturn rogue with a cold expression. Sometimes he was even a ruthless person. However, there was one person in this world who remembered what Soren used to be. She had been remembering things since she was very young. In her earliest memories, her brother was a handsome young man with 2 dimples when he smiled. He would carry her, who was only 1 or 2 years old, to watch flowers and catch butterflies under the warm afternoon sun. He would make funny faces and make funny faces to make her laugh. At that time, their mother hadn't gone crazy. Although they lived a poor life, it wasn't too bad. Later on they became orphans. When Soren was 14 or 15 years old, he brought her, who was only 3 years old, to wander the streets. Her brother did almost everything to support her. She still remembered the ferocious look on his face when he first got into a fight because of her, and how he had to comfort her when she was crying. She also remembered the first time her brother stole something, and how his hands trembled with joy and nervousness. She also remembered the first time her brother killed someone because of her. Even though her back was facing him, she could still feel his fear. He didn't dare to fall asleep, and she could only hug his arm tightly and curl up in his embrace. It was as if that could strengthen their courage. Her brother smiled less and less, and his expression became colder and colder. He would only smile when he was comforting her, and his dimples would make her heart feel warm. It was a good thing that both of them had dimples. Her brother was her brother, and her brother wasn't just her brother. There were some things that outsiders would never understand, and they didn't need outsiders to understand. "Sister Gloria." Vivian timidly looked at the mistress of the caravan and whispered, "Why don't you come with us? If there's any danger that neither my brother nor Vivian can handle, you can protect us. You're so strong, so there won't be any problems. Plus, it's so boring to stay here all day. Don't you want to go to the Elven Kingdom?" The mistress of the caravan was amused. She patted the little girl's head and said, "I was the one who told you not to go to the Elven Kingdom. Why are you asking me to go with you?" The little girl sneaked a glance at the mistress of the caravan and whispered, "What if we meet a monster that neither my brother nor I can defeat? Then Vivian will be eaten by the monster. Then I won't be able to see you again." Sob, sob, sob. The little girl's acting skills were terrible. She was clearly pretending to cry, but she didn't shed any tears. She rubbed her eyes with her little hands and stole a glance at Gloria, but she was really cute and funny. The mistress of the caravan couldn't help but smile a little. Slap. The mistress of the caravan grabbed the little girl and placed her on her knees. She then slapped the little girl's butt and said, "That's what you get for pretending. You little imp." The mistress of the caravan sighed and hesitated for a moment before saying, Let me think about it. Charm successful. The mistress of the caravan felt that she had failed to achieve her goal and was even persuaded by the little girl's pitiful expression. She looked a little discouraged and got up to leave. But at this time, the little girl suddenly reached out and grabbed one of her fingers, whispering, "Sister Gloria, can you sleep with me tonight?" "Okay." The mistress of the caravan hesitated for a moment before nodding. She lifted the soft velvet blanket and lay down. Vivian snuggled into her arms like a kitten and rested her head on her chest. The little girl twitched her nose and sniffed. She arched her nose like a puppy and whispered, "Sister smells so good." Gloria didn't reply. She hugged the little girl and closed her eyes. Sometimes she didn't know why she couldn't harden her heart toward Vivian. Perhaps she really liked the little girl. When she first saw the little girl's petite figure, she felt sorry for her. It was as if her maternal instincts had been awakened. As they got to know each other more, she was able to infect Gloria with her emotions. Gloria could feel the little girl's joy, seriousness, and persistence. It was hard to explain, but Gloria enjoyed having the little girl by her side. Perhaps they were similar in some ways. Big sister's chest is so soft. Feels so good to touch. The little girl didn't seem to be sleepy. She pinched the mistress of the caravan's chest curiously. At this age, curiosity was at its peak. Anything new could attract her attention. Vivian's memories of her mother were blurry. She couldn't even remember her mother's face. The mistress of the caravan before her filled in the gaps in her image of her mother. She was a gentle, beautiful, and elegant woman who cared for her. Smack. Gloria slapped her butt again. Vivian obediently retracted her hand even though she really wanted to touch her butt again. Gloria's cheeks flushed red. She glared at the little girl and said sternly, "Don't move and don't touch me. Go to sleep or I'll cast a deep sleep spell on you." The little girl finally behaved herself. She hugged the mistress of the caravan's arm and buried her head in her bosom. Her breathing gradually evened out and she fell asleep soon after. After all, children at this age were very sleepy. Chapter 89. Soren almost stayed up all night. During this time he was desperately trying to analyze invisibility, trying to build its spell model into his brain. Invisibility was the most difficult level 2 spell, but it was also the most useful level 2 spell. Not only could it make the caster invisible, but it could also be used on others, making them invisible. After invisibility, the target would be completely invisible to the naked eye, but the sound and traces left behind would be there, which could be relied on to determine the approximate location of the target. Invisibility, level 2 spell. After using invisibility, the target will disappear from sight, unless it is a creature with the ability to see through invisibility, or a spell that detects invisibility. Launching an attack after invisibility will cause the spell to fail. Invisibility can only confuse people's sight, it can't erase the sound made, nor can it eliminate the traces of movement. Under the effect of invisibility, picking up an item will also make it invisible, and putting it down will make it appear. Each point of spell power lasts for 10 minutes, which can be constant. Soren was now a level 5 wizard. He had 5 points of spell power brought by his profession level and 5 points of spell power brought by his intelligence. If he cast invisibility, it could last for 100 minutes, which was about an hour and a half. This was definitely a long time. If used well, it could have a great effect, and in case of danger he could easily escape. Moreover, this time he took Vivian to Autumnfall and there might be monsters on the way. If there were too many monsters to deal with, he could also cast invisibility on Vivian and let her hide to avoid danger. There were no monsters in the wilderness that could see through invisibility, which was equivalent to adding a very safe insurance. Invisibility potions and invisibility scrolls were one of the most common tools used by rogues. In the case of sneaking, stealing, and backstabbing, whether it was to steal wealth or assassinate targets, it could play a great role. Especially in the case of stealing, it was even more successful. Soren had successfully made a fortune because he got a bottle of invisibility potion. He got out of the slums and directly entered the ranks of well-off adventurers. The invisibility potion lasted for an hour and cost around 200 Kindler coins. This kind of potion was relatively rare. If rogues got their hands on it, they would usually use it on important targets. Otherwise, they would sneak into the noble district in the middle of the night to steal. If they were lucky, they could steal thousands of Kindler coins in an hour. However, they had to be careful to avoid those who were obviously not to be trifled with. There were many alarms in the houses of the greater nobles. Most of them were used to steal the wealth of the lesser nobles. Occasionally, they could also steal precious treasures and artworks. At that time, the most famous person was a guy who stole 50,000 Kindler antiques. As a result, he was wanted by the entire South for a long time. Soren didn't mind stealing. If it was necessary, he would definitely go back to his old profession without any psychological barriers. Invisibility was the most useful spell. After so many days of research and analysis, he had completed about 60% of the spell's progress. The main reason was that he had increased his literacy to 115 points. Coupled with his experience and intelligence bonus, the speed at which he learned spells was obviously much faster than before. If there were no accidents, he could complete the analysis of invisibility in 2 days at most. At that time, he could memorize 2 invisibility spells. With more than 3 hours of invisibility every day, it was enough for him to do a lot of things. Low-grade wizards had very few spell slots. Because of the limitations of the magic net, most wizards had about the same number of spell slots. Intelligence could only affect the strength of spells, the highest level of spells used, and the speed and number of spells memorized. It was not until the collapse of the magic net that the talented wizards were completely liberated. They could greatly increase the power and number of spells. In the current situation, half of the power of all spells would be absorbed by the magic net and then turned into the power of the goddess of magic. Most of this power was used to maintain the operation of the magic net, and a small part was used to strengthen her divine power. Soren now had a total of 6 level 0 spell slots, 4 level 1 spell slots, Wizard Ring +1, 2 level 2 spell slots and 1 level 3 spell slot. This meant that he could cast a total of 13 spells after memorizing them. Level 0 spells were equivalent to a wizard's level +1, and a level 10 wizard would have 11 level 0 spell slots. The other spell slots were more troublesome to calculate. He wasn't sure how the goddess of magic set up the magic net system, so Soren could only roughly calculate his highest number of spell slots. Many of the spells used by wizards needed to be stacked with equipment. Many high-grade rare items could add additional spells. As long as the magic net existed, the goddess of magic had the final say in casting spells. If she expanded the authority of the magic net, wizards would be able to cast more spells. If she tightened the authority of the magic net, wizards would be able to cast fewer spells. Therefore, after the time of troubles began, the goddess of magic received a lot of attacks. There was no lack of legendary wizards who took the initiative to attack her. Their goal was to destroy the magic net system and remove the restrictions on their abilities. However, the price they paid was heavy. Many wizards lost their ability to cast spells. Phew. Soren rubbed his forehead and washed his face with water. He then pulled out his curved sword and began practicing the White Raven battle tactic. As his profession level increased, so did his energy. It wasn't a big problem for him to not sleep for a few days straight. The progress of the White Raven sword tactic was very slow. These combat techniques required a lot of effort to hone. He still had more than 5,000 slaughter EXP. If he wanted to, he could directly level up his rogue or wizard class. However, Soren still wanted to see if he could trigger the profession advancement. The main thing was that profession advancement would greatly increase his abilities. Stealth would increase his stealth and detection by 10 points. Godly Thief would increase his pick, lock and trap by 10 points. Bounty Hunter would increase his search by 10 points and 8 tracking ability. Profession advancement was a strengthening of the original profession level. Usually, it would increase one's abilities in a certain area. However, the price to pay was that the slaughter EXP needed to level up the profession advancement. Just the profession advancement alone required 5,000 slaughter EXP. The subsequent profession advancement would basically increase the profession advancement's level by several folds. Profession advancement had a basic skill requirement, but there were also some special conditions. Currently, the easiest profession for Soren to level up was stealth. As long as he had 150 points in stealth, he would be able to meet the requirements. However, he still wanted to see if he could unlock other profession advancement. For example, Shadow Dancer, which required the ability to dodge, Bounty Hunter, which required the ability to track, and so on. These profession advancement's abilities would be very strong once they reached the legendary realm. The Bounty Hunter was the most outstanding profession advancement. After reaching the legendary realm, he could place a soul mark on his target. After that, he could use a special skill to travel through the Shadow Realm and appear behind the target out of thin air. His assassination ability was basically on par with a legendary assassin. If Soren didn't have a wizard class, he would undoubtedly be able to level up to stealth. However, with the buff of invisibility, the requirement to level up to stealth was greatly reduced. With the buff of invisibility and greater invisibility in the future, it could completely replace the additional abilities gained by stealth. Therefore, Soren's current plan was to further enhance his explosive power in battle. Currently, assassin, shadow dancer, and bounty hunter were his top choices. These three profession advancements had powerful combat abilities. If an assassin wants to learn alchemy, I must have the ability to make poisons. Soren put away his curved sword and walked towards his room. He needed to buy some small items. The shadow dancer's evasion skill is very high. I'm afraid my own evasion skill is still lacking. Although bounty hunters have powerful tracking abilities in the future, they don't have much combat ability before reaching the legendary realm. There are still a lot of prerequisites. Now, I can only see which profession advancement's condition is met first. Wizards were always busy. Soren went to the secret shop to buy parchment paper, ink, quill pens, gem powder, and so on. These were all tools used by wizards, not ordinary people. He also bought himself some food for the night. Then he began to copy the scrolls according to his memory. This was the most important ability of a wizard, and also the most powerful guarantee of combat ability. The only downside was that it was very expensive. In total, he spent more than 100 Kindler coins. After returning to his room, Soren began to copy the scrolls. He had memorized 4 arcane missile spells, so he could try to copy the scrolls 4 times. Basically, he would definitely fail at the beginning. However, he could improve his basic skills during the process. As his scroll copying skill improved, the success rate would also increase. Finally, he could try to copy a high-level spell scroll. As a spellcaster, it was impossible for him to not have a few scrolls to protect himself. 2 hours passed quickly. As expected, Soren failed. He failed to copy the first arcane missile spell scroll. He lost about 20 Kindler coins but gained 2 points in the scroll copying skill. He was not surprised by the failure. After resting for a while, he continued to copy the scrolls. When he copied the third scroll, he finally succeeded. More than 100 Kindler coins were exchanged for an arcane missile spell scroll. Then he gained 12 points in the scroll copying skill. Failure only gave him 2 points, but success gave him 6 points. Looks like my focus skill is still not high enough. Soren put away the spell scroll that he succeeded in, and at the same time, he packed up his things and prepared to go see Vivian. Copying a level 1 spell could be upgraded to 50 points in the scroll copying skill. After that, he would have to copy higher level spells. Copying a level 9 spell scroll required more than 400 points in the scroll copying skill. He sighed, looked at the scrapped materials and murmured, "Spellcasters are really expensive. I haven't even started to study alchemy yet. Looks like I'll have to do something after learning invisibility." As a rogue, stealing was a normal thing to do. Looking at the wealth he had left, Soren decided to go to the noble district and do something he used to do before he left. Chapter 90. 2 days passed by in a flash. Soren was very busy during this period of time. He finished analyzing invisibility in the afternoon and finally managed to construct the complicated second circle spell in his mind. Soren couldn't wait to memorize the spell model after he finished constructing it. After more than 2 hours of meditation, he finally completed the 2 spell models for invisibility. Since he didn't know many spells, he didn't spend much time memorizing them. 4 first circle arcane missiles and 2 second circle invisibility. Although Soren had recorded a few third circle spells, he didn't have much time to study them. He could only wait until he had more time to analyze them. After completing the spell model, Soren went to rest. On one hand, he wanted to recover his energy, and on the other, he wanted to wait for night to come. He was now spending money like water. Although copy scroll had increased to 36 points, he had spent 300 to 400 gold dirhams. The gold coins in his hands were a little tight. Night came. Soren woke up around 10 o'clock in the evening. He changed into the clothes he prepared in advance and put on a mask. There was no shortage of items in the gray area. As long as you could find them and know how to deal with them, you could buy all kinds of strange things from them. The curfew in Whiterun was still in effect, and the number of guards patrolling the streets had increased by half. Soren's figure hid in the shadows as he carefully sneaked toward the noble district. The social hierarchy in this world was very strict. The rich district and the poor district were separated, and the noble district was even more independent. The road to the noble district was specially guarded by guards. Ordinary civilians were not allowed to get close. If they saw them, they would be questioned and driven away. Only those who looked well-dressed would be slightly relaxed and allowed to pass. In any case, no homeless or poor people were allowed in the noble district. Otherwise they would be punished. Compared to the other areas that were dirty and messy, the noble district was very clean and tidy. There was no excrement from humans or animals, nor was there any sewage or muddy ditches. The ground was paved with flat stone slabs, and there were underground drainage channels on both sides of the road. There were flower beds and big trees along the road, and there were small independent villas on both sides of the road. Most of the windows were made of stained glass, which was a symbol of wealth. Ordinary civilians mostly used paper. This kind of expensive alchemy material was not something they could afford. There were guards patrolling the roads and everywhere. The security of the noble district was the best. As there was no shortage of cheat fingers who wanted to come here to make a fortune, the security was also much tighter. However, if they were caught, they would be in trouble. Stealing from a noble was a heavier crime than stealing from a commoner. They could have an arm broken or be sent to the mines to do manual labor. As Soren chanted a spell in a low voice, he used invisibility in a dark alley. His figure gradually disappeared. The moonlight directly penetrated his position and sprinkled on the ground. It was as if he had completely disappeared. Soren's footsteps were very light when he was in stealth mode. He almost did not alert any targets. He walked directly in front of the two white horse guards. The distance between them was less than 3 meters, and the two guards did not notice him at all. They were still talking about how many waitresses in a tavern. After they finished talking, they even laughed in a way that only men would understand. There was nothing strange in front of them. Whether it was light or shadows, they did not even hear the faint sound of footsteps. If Soren wanted to, he could take the lives of these two guards in an instant. Inside the small villas it was pitch black. At this time most people were asleep. Behind the villas were the residences of the nobles, and that was Soren's forbidden area. Humans still maintained a relatively orderly society. They had not completely devolved into a society where only the strong were respected. Many of the nobles were ordinary people or slightly stronger than ordinary people. Only the nobles who held more power would have strict requirements for strength. Otherwise, they would not have the ability to rule a city. Many of the nobles here inherited their titles. Some were permanent, while others could only last for 3 generations. If there were no outstanding talents, they would gradually be reduced to the status of commoners. Lesser nobles did not have many valuable things, while the greater nobles had powerful guards in their residences. Soren's target was the middle-class nobles. Most of these nobles had manors outside, but they would also have a villa in the city. They would spend most of the year in the city, mainly to maintain contact with other nobles. March to June was the time when the nobles socialized. They would frequently hold banquets, and would even invite the priests of the goddess of joy or the goddess of love and beauty to attend. These banquets often hid many dirty deals, and some were just purely for pleasure. Their lifestyle was very similar to the nobles of the British Empire. Soren carefully observed his surroundings. He quickly chose a suitable target. It was a villa that was not small. It obviously did not seem to have any guards, and there was a large garden behind it. The servants' sleeping quarters had already turned off the lights, but the master's room on the second floor had a faint light. Soren's figure walked out from the night. He calculated the time of the guard's patrol, then suddenly jumped onto the edge of the balcony and quietly climbed to the second floor. "Brad, is that you?" A languid voice came from the room. Then, a charming lady wearing a red nightgown tied with a silk ribbon climbed out of the bed. She softly said to the balcony, "Don't make a sound. Come in quickly." The candlelight in the room was very dim, and there was a fragrance in the air. It was as if it was full of lust. The beautiful lady heard a slight noise, but no one responded. She seemed to be a little nervous. She carefully looked outside and saw that she was wearing black silk stockings. This kind of alchemy silk was expensive. It seemed that the owner of this villa was not cheap. No one would wear silk stockings to sleep. The other party's dress was obviously arranged for something else. Soren's mouth showed a hint of playfulness. He did not expect to encounter something like this just as he was doing his old job. A tryst. The lady in front of him was obviously waiting for her lover. This kind of sneaky behavior was very popular among the nobles of the South, and everyone had a tacit understanding of it. The circle of nobles had always been very chaotic. This group of people who did not have to worry about food and clothing only had this hobby to satisfy their empty hearts. If they could not be satisfied with this, they would eventually fall into the realm of some evil gods. For example, there was an evil god who liked to appear in forbidden carnival ceremonies. There was a time when the goddess of joy fell into forbidden pleasure. If it was not for some kind gods who pulled her back, she would have deviated into the realm of chaotic good. Among the gods, the one who fell the most was the goddess of cat and dance. Now she was in the chaotic neutral camp. It was said that she was almost ruined by the Lady of the Night. If she fell completely, There was no doubt that the Lady of the Night camp would have one more god. There was a slight noise in the distance. Then, a rather vigorous figure flipped over the wall and entered. She lowered her voice and said, "Camellia? It's me, dear. I'm going up now." A guy who was good at fighting. Soren's night vision was very good. He could clearly see a handsome young man in the garden sneakily approaching. Judging from his face, he was at most in his 20s and he was quite tall. On the other side, the noblewoman seemed to be at least in her 30s. Her charming face couldn't hide the traces at the corners of her eyes and her thick waist. "Come up quickly, my dear," the noblewoman urged in a suppressed voice. Her breathing had become rapid. The young man below was obviously very excited. He jumped up and climbed along the wall to the balcony. As soon as he came up, he pounced on the lady in front of him and kissed her fiercely. At the same time, he used his hands to rub her full breasts. The two of them moved into the room and their lips never parted. It seemed that they were both very hungry. Soren was not interested in watching a hand-to-hand fight. He quietly moved his feet, then suddenly appeared and knocked out the noblewoman with a slash. Then his palm was as fast as lightning. In the next second he grabbed the young man's neck and kicked him in the crotch. The young man didn't even have time to scream before his eyes rolled back and he fainted. It seemed like something was broken. Soren's expression was very calm. He put the two people on the ground and then reached out to search their bodies. Rings, necklaces, earrings, bracelets, all the valuable things on their bodies were taken out by Soren. He also pinched the lady's chest and commented, "Your waist is too thick and it's too soft here. It's almost a bit saggy. It's far worse than the drows." Among the females he was most familiar with the drows. Maybe it was because he had stayed in the Underdark for too long. Soren peeled off a ring from the young man's finger and looked at it under the moonlight. In an instant his whole body was covered in cold sweat. It was an energy ring. After activation, it could emit an energy ray with a strength of about 30. It was worth about 2,000 Kindler coins. It had the ability to kill low-grade professions in one shot. Fortunately, he was very fast and did not give the two people any time to react. Otherwise, if they were careless, there would be a hole in their bodies. It seems like they're nobles with high status? Soren looked at the blood on the man's crotch. This injury would not kill him. The other party was obviously a professions, and his vitality was relatively tenacious. The invisibility effect had disappeared. Soren dragged the two fainted guys into the room and then began to search for loot. Damn it. Soren looked at a safe in the hidden compartment and cursed. With his 45 points of unlock skill, he could not open the safe. It seemed that some special device was used. Although he had a way to break the lock by force, it would probably cause a lot of noise. In desperation, he could only hold the safe in his multi-dimensional bag. It was just enough to fit the safe. He simply took out the things in the multi-dimensional bag and put them in another multi-dimensional bag, and then put them back together with the safe. Before he left, he looked at the two people on the floor and kindly took down the quilt to cover them. It was already bad luck that they met him on a date and got their balls knocked out. It would be bad if they caught a cold. Chapter 91. Soren landed softly on the balcony. He quickly cast invisibility on himself and walked out of the noble district. He had gotten quite a lot from that trip. He had found over 100 Kindler coins in the hidden compartment. Including the jewelry and the ring, he could get about 300 Kindler coins worth of profit. Of course, that was not counting the value of the energy ring. Otherwise, the ring alone would be worth about 2,000 Kindler coins. He would have to wait until he opened the safe. As for the two unlucky fellows, Soren did not care about them at all. He was leaving Whiterun the next day. It was about time for the skinning incident to spread to Whiterun. The skinning incident had affected the entire southern region, which meant that skinning incidents had occurred in most of the cities in Whiterun. The purpose of the skinning incident was to spread fear and strengthen the power of a certain demon from the abyss. Soren did not know the specifics. He did not have access to such high-level missions at the time. The effect of invisibility was very powerful. Soren swaggered out of the noble district. When he passed by an alley, he suddenly saw a shadowy figure sneaking around. The Shadow Council? Or the Masked Walker? Soren suddenly stopped in his tracks and hid behind a wooden crate to observe the silhouette. Without night vision, Soren could not see the figure clearly. He looked around cautiously, then opened the cover of Whiterun's sewer, and quickly dived into the sewer. Soren did not follow them. This was a very dangerous thing to do. He was able to live until he reached the realm of legends because he was not overly curious and wanted to find out the truth of everything. He retreated from the alley and hurried back to his place. There were many disputes before the time of troubles. The most active ones were the Children of God, the Shadow Mask, the Droll Cult, and a mysterious organization called the Godslayer. There were many legendary existences among them. If he accidentally bumped into them, he would die at their hands. Soren did not want to see them now. After returning to his residence, Soren took out the safe and took out some tools to unlock it. After some effort, he still didn't succeed. He could only use a more violent method to break the lock from the gap. Fortunately, this wasn't a magic lock. Ordinary locks, no matter how precise they were, could still be broken by brute force. After opening the box, Soren couldn't help but reveal a disappointed expression, because inside the box was a property deed. This kind of thing could be reissued through the city hall, and there was no way to exchange it for any money. However, when he flipped open the contract, what he saw made him hold his breath. It was a very familiar card. It was not the card Soren had once obtained, but a higher-level arcane card. This? Soren's expression suddenly became very disappointed. When he flipped open the card, he noticed that there was already an image on the front of the card. This meant that the card had been used before, and the mana on it had already disappeared. What appeared on the card was a mechanical arm. It looked a bit like the arm of a steel golem. There were hexagram runes on all four sides, and a mysterious black vortex behind it. It seemed like this card had been kept for a long time. There were some light scratches on it, and they didn't look like they were left there recently. A golem's arm? Soren picked up the arcane card and carefully examined it. He muttered to himself, "Is this one of the cards in the combination deck? That woman has no combat ability at all. How could she have something like this?" Arcane cards were very mysterious. Soren knew a little more about the card of many things, but he didn't know much about arcane cards. He only knew that arcane cards could be combined, allowing the user to summon a powerful creature, or temporarily gain a powerful ability. For example, 3 different wind elemental cards could summon a legendary Elder Wind Elemental. This was the only arcane card that he had collected, and it was very popular for a period of time. Even Soren was very tempted and wanted to assassinate that guy. A row of data suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. Enchanted Armor Arm, arcane card, obtained. Do you want to repair it? Enchanted armor? Soren was stunned for a moment, and then he tried to repair it. Repair it? A row of data appeared again. Enchanted Armor Arm, arcane card, required 80,000 soul points to repair. Insufficient slaughter experience points. Unable to repair. 80,000 slaughter experience points? Are you kidding me? That much slaughter experience points should be enough for me to level up to grade 3. Soren was speechless as he looked at the arcane card in his hand. He carefully observed the scratches on the card, which seemed to be made by a sword. The card's texture was very hard, so it took a lot of effort to leave a mark on it. He had heard of enchanted armor before. It was a product of the Arcane Empire, and it was one of the standard equipment in the floating city. It was a top-grade product in the golem domain. Golems were relatively common in this world. They were one of the standard equipment in the wizard tower. If you went to the wizard city, you could even see golem patrol guards. Golems were from clay golems, stone golems, iron golems, and even steel golems. Although they were not weak, there was a limit to their strength. Even the strongest diamond golems only had the combat strength of a tier 4 magic beast. The only legendary golem structure that was developed during the Arcane Empire was the enchanted armor in front of him, or it was called enchanted skeletal armor. There were some enchanted skeletal armor in the ruins at the bottom of the sea, and it almost destroyed the legendary team that Soren joined. What's the use of having only one arm? Soren put down the card in disappointment and continued to rummage through the contents of the safe. There were some jewels in it, which comforted him a little. He threw the arcane card into his multidimensional bag. It was useless to him for a short period of time. Soren could not spend so much slaughter experience points to repair it. Besides, what was the use of repairing an arm? Could he rely on an arm to fight for him? A full set of arcane cards would at least include the head, the limbs, and the power unit. No matter how strong the enchanted armor was, it was not worth wasting his precious slaughter experience on it. The sky was starting to brighten. Soren was in high spirits. He played with the energy ring in his hand and observed its properties. This was one of the most common rare grade items, and it came with a ring of protection. The energy ring could shoot a ray of energy, and the ring of protection could create a 100-point defensive force field. They were the best life-saving items in the early stages of the game. Item type: Energy Ring +1. Item grade: Rare, grade 1. Item description: a ring enchanted with alchemy. After activation, it can shoot a 36-point spell power energy ray. It can be recharged with alchemy. Requirements: none. Effect: energy ray, 1/1. The recharging of the ring was very simple. He just needed to set up an alchemy circle and use alchemy to convert some gems into energy. Soren used to wear A+3 energy ring and A+3 ring of protection. They were the items that were second only to legendary. The ring of protection in particular had saved his life several times. After the sun rose, Soren walked back to the caravan's base as if nothing had happened. He did not leave any traces of what he did last night, and neither of them saw his face clearly, so he was not worried about being discovered. However, the security in Whiterun seemed to be a lot stricter than yesterday. He wondered if they had notified the guards, but being robbed in the middle of the night was probably not something to be proud of. When Soren arrived at the caravan's base, he was surprised to find that the place was also heavily guarded. Before Soren could say anything, the mistress of the caravan said with a serious expression, "Someone was skinned last night." What? Soren's expression changed slightly and he said without hesitation, "Where's Vivian? I want to take her away from here." The mistress of the caravan stared at him and said slowly, "So you do know something. No wonder you left Whiterun with me that day. Did you already know what disaster was going to befall Whiterun?" The skinning incident. It was the biggest chain of events in the south. Soren was silent for a moment, then slowly said, "I don't know much about it. I only know that it's a sacrificial ritual of some evil god. It might affect many places, and the fallen will bring a lot of slaughter and death. Fear will spread everywhere." "I knew it." The mistress of the caravan had a look of understanding on her face. "So that's why you want to take Vivian away? To the elves' territory? It's the territory of the forest goddess, and it's hard for the fallen to sneak in." Soren did not know how to answer, so he nodded slightly. He could not tell her about the upcoming time of troubles, so he could use the skinning incident as an answer. After all, it was just the beginning. The mistress of the caravan hesitated for a moment, then took out a file and handed it to Soren. She said seriously, "How much do you know?" "This is what the Witch Council told me. There was a mass suicide in Psalm City. There were thousands of people who watched a bard's performance, and hundreds of them committed suicide that night, including high-grade clerics." "Does this have anything to do with the skinning incident?" "Helpheimer?" Soren looked at the file with a serious expression, then slowly said, "It shouldn't have anything to do with it. That bard might be one of the legendary characters. Have you heard of the Helpheimer before?" The mistress of the caravan trembled and murmured, "Helpheimer? Didn't he fall hundreds of years ago?" Sauron glanced at her and finally decided to tell her what he knew. He said in a deep voice, "It was only his body that died. At the moment of his death he made a deal with the devil in hell." Helpheimer. One of the only 3 legendary bard in the world. Chapter 92. The first winner has appeared. After deducting the 4 little troublemakers, the winner is, Don't Look at Trash S. His winning message is, "I'm here, I want to tell you, looks determine your fate, ha. Congratulations to this book friend for winning the prize. Please join the book friend group and contact the 8 cats to receive the prize. The prize is a small toy that you can choose from. Congratulations, your looks are really good." The second round of lucky draw is still the original post. Please leave a new message to calculate the lucky draw. There were 3 legendary bards. They were all monsters. They could cast legendary spells like wizards, master legendary battle skills like warriors, and escape into the shadow plane like thieves. These 3 legendary bards appeared in different times, but their abilities were all very terrible. As the most useless profession, they were the model of being good at everything, but there were some unreasonable monsters among the bards. The Helpheimer was one of them. Legend has it that he was a chanter before he fell, a believer favored by a god. Later it was said that he was tempted by the Lord of Hell and finally became the incarnation of evil. There weren't many records about the Helpheimer, but his achievements were very glorious. He killed a total of 16 legendary professions. And he also created one of the 3 forbidden songs, Revelation, Prelude to Hell. It was said that this forbidden song had a total of 6 parts, and the power of each part was equivalent to an 8th level spell. If these 6 parts were combined, it would be the legendary Hell's Descent, a very terrible legendary spell. He was one of the original legendary professions who was active during the time of troubles. He successfully killed 3 weak gods who had mastered music and used this as an opportunity to become an evil god who had mastered music. The Helpheimer was also a master of blasphemy. At that time, many people in the evil camp worked for him in exchange for power. If what was written in this file was true, then he should have performed the first part of Revelation, Prelude to Hell. He used despair as a spiritual imprint into the minds of the audience present. If their will couldn't resist this power, they would feel endless despair and commit suicide. Soren had heard of the name Chanter City. It seemed to be a city far away. As for whether this happened, he didn't remember. At that time he had never been to such a remote place. There were many mysterious powers in this world. Some existences had mastered domains that were completely beyond the imagination of mortals. The mistress fell silent for a moment. She looked at Soren and asked, "Are you leaving today?" Soren gently nodded and replied, "Yes." The mistress had a complicated expression on her face, and she looked at Soren with a hint of disgust. "All right then. I'll go with you." What? Soren raised his head in surprise. "Why?" The mistress looked at him unhappily and said, "I'm worried about Vivian. You won't be able to protect her if she's in danger. I don't want to see her in danger because of your stupidity. If it wasn't for the fact that she really cares about you, I really want to teach you a lesson." Soren was speechless, but he could feel how much the mistress cared about Vivian. There were some things that Soren could not say as it was not the right time yet. However, the mistress of the merchant caravan was much friendlier than before. Her concern for the little girl was enough to make Soren have a good impression of her. The mistress looked at him and said, "I'll send you all to the Elven Kingdom, then I'll teleport back to the north." For a moment, Soren wanted to tell her that the north was also the center of the chaos, but he swallowed his words in the end. Perhaps it would be better to reveal something to her when the time was right, when the believers of the other gods couldn't contact them. That would be the beginning of the time of troubles. It would take at least half a month to reach the Elven Kingdom, which would add up to a month. It was impossible for all the gods to not respond to the prayers of their believers for a month. By that time, many powerful organizations in the world would have realized that something had happened in the Elven Kingdom. The silence lasted for 2 years, and many of the believers of the other gods began to panic. Some of the priests of the evil gods even tried to hold evil rituals to attract the attention of the other gods, but it was to no avail. Many of the priests of the good gods also held large-scale celebrations. The Elven Kingdom even held a special ceremony to summon the consciousness of the oak tree, but it was to no avail. Soren clearly remembered the reason for this. This ceremony would summon the legendary queen of the Dryads, nature's incarnation, and allow a mortal to copulate with her. It was an ancient ceremony to heal the wounds of the forest. "Wait here." The mistress glanced at Soren and walked towards the secret room. She then said in a low voice, "I need to prepare some things. Vivian needs to get ready as well. We'll leave at noon." Soren nodded and didn't say anything. About half an hour later, the little girl's cute figure appeared in front of him. She was wearing her original clothes and she was wearing a pair of clean moccasins. She walked up to Soren proudly and sat on his knees. She then raised her feet and said, "Look, big brother. Vivian has grown up a little. These shoes are just right for me." Soren didn't say anything and kissed her on the head. There were some small trinkets on the little girl's body, but they didn't look like simple decorations. They looked more like rare-grade items. Soren didn't doubt the wealth of a high-grade northern witch. She was definitely the typical rich and beautiful woman in this world, and she was even the ruler of a city. The witch council ruled most of the cities in the north, and the high-grade members among them owned a large amount of wealth. When the mistress of the caravan appeared again, Soren was stunned. It wasn't that there was anything special about her. In fact, the mistress of the caravan was only wearing an ordinary gray robe that almost covered her entire body. If he didn't look closely, he wouldn't even be able to tell if she was a man or a woman. However, the other party's attire gave him a sense of familiarity, as if he had seen him before. Of course, he didn't mean when he was in Amber City or Whiterun. It was just an impression in his memory. He thought about it carefully, but he still couldn't remember, so he put it aside for the time being. Some things couldn't be remembered completely. After all, it was easy to forget a short impression. They set out at noon. The mistress of the caravan had prepared a carriage. Many caravans had already left, and the road to Autumnfall had been cleared. However, there were still some scattered monsters in the wilderness, which was unavoidable. The ancient red dragon was still building its nest, and it wouldn't cause any trouble for the next 1 or 2 months. For the time being, it was a relatively peaceful period. That is, if the skinning incident didn't spread. Whiterun was just like Amber City in the beginning. Panic was spreading in the city, and the Whiterun guards, who had just experienced a great battle, were flustered and exasperated. It seemed that they couldn't wait to hang the fallen. Thanks to the mistress of the caravan, they easily passed through the security check. Then, Soren started driving the carriage and brought them to Autumnfall. The carriage was specially custom-made. It was very stable and comfortable inside. One would not feel the slightest bump. The mistress of the caravan lay lazily in the carriage, and there was a special incense beside her that smelled very good. The little girl sat beside her, reading a book. She would ask the mistress if she didn't understand anything. Occasionally she would look up at Soren in front of the carriage, and when she was bored she would climb out and sit beside him, watching the scenery pass by. After watching for a while, she went back into the carriage and took out some exquisite snacks from her pocket. She put them into Sauron's mouth with a face of presenting a treasure. Perhaps it was because there was an extra high-grade mage. The journey this time was more like a vacation. The mistress of the caravan was always able to take out a lot of things out of thin air. She closed her eyes and dozed off while answering the little girl's endless questions. Chapter 93. Moonlight shone on the plains. Soren leaned against the side of the carriage and closed his eyes to take a nap. They were at the edge of the area, and even though the area had been cleared, Soren did not dare to let his guard down. He knew that the reason he was able to reach the realm of legends was because of his vigilance. Amandina left the carriage and walked around the area. A faint glow of magic appeared around the carriage, and when she came back she looked at Soren and said, "Take a rest. I've already set up a defensive spell." This was the benefit of being a spellcaster. Soren nodded slightly, looked into the distance and said, "Thank you." The mistress paused for a moment, then shook her head and said, "Call me Gloria." My tone was a bit harsh at the beginning. You might have your own difficulties, but you're not willing to tell me. The northern witch in front of him was different. Soren had met many spellcasters, and most of them were eccentric and arrogant. Gloria's mother, for example, had the typical attitude of a spellcaster. They respected the strong and ignored the weak. However, Gloria was different. She was the polar opposite of her mother. Soren would have doubted if they were biological mother and daughter if not for the similarities in their facial features. Vivian breathed evenly in the carriage. The little girl was very tired after sitting in the carriage for a whole day. The horses were very quiet because of the spell. A simple charm spell was enough to make them obey. Gloria hesitated for a moment, then sat down beside Soren and whispered, "You're different from the others I've met. As a rogue you're very knowledgeable. I'm afraid that some wizards can't compare to you. However, you can be very stubborn sometimes. You even remind me of the monks I've met. They're also very stubborn." Was he trying to ease the tension between them? Soren turned his head and looked at her. In fact, all he could see were her beautiful eyes. He played with a kindler in his hand and a golden light danced on his fingertips. He slowly said, "You're also different from the other witches I've seen. From what I know, they're all arrogant women. You know what? The tavern once evaluated the 3 most difficult types of women to deal with. The first was the drows, the second was the Amazons, and the third was you northern witches." Gloria revealed a strange expression and said, "Is that so? So this is how people see the northern witches?" It was obvious that she rarely went to taverns. That was the place where information was the most up-to-date, but it was also too chaotic. Generally, noble spellcasters would not go to such low-level places because they were really rich. Just like how nobles who believed themselves to be of noble blood would not mix with commoners, there was a clear difference between the ranks of professions. Yes. Soren looked at the bright stars in the night sky and said seriously, "But you're not the same. You're easier to get along with than them, and of course you're more beautiful." The slight compliment made Gloria smile slightly. She shook her head and was about to say something when she suddenly stood up with a horrified expression and looked up in the direction of Whiterun. Unknowingly, the distant horizon had turned fiery red. That familiar scene caused the two of them to change their expressions greatly. Meteor burst. Soren looked at the distance in disbelief. He did not know if it was because of fear or something else, but his expression was very stiff. Just as they left Amber City, the city was turned into ruins by the meteor burst. Now, as soon as they left Whiterun, someone in Whiterun cast a legendary spell. Soren would not believe it if it was not a coincidence, but he was also full of doubts because he did not know why this happened. The spell failed. The fiery red clouds in the sky gradually dissipated. Gloria's expression was very serious. She said in a deep voice, "Someone interrupted the spell." Whiterun was not Amber City. Amber City was a new city built by the river, so it wasn't very strong yet. However, Whiterun had been around for a long time, and its founder was even a legendary class who had successfully slain a dragon. It was impossible for such a powerful spell to go unnoticed by the Guardians. As long as a high-grade spellcaster or above teleported over to interrupt the spell would be stopped. The higher the grade of a spell, the longer it would take to cast it, especially large-scale spells with a large area of effect. Are you still not going to tell me? Gloria frowned and stared at Soren in front of her. Her expression was very serious. She said in a deep voice, "Is Vivian the child of God?" The child of God. Gloria had this thought in her mind a long time ago. After all, the little girl's talent was too outstanding. If a genius among mortals could have 18 points of innate attribute, then a genius among geniuses could only reach 20 points of innate attribute at most. However, Vivian's innate attribute was already more than 20 points. Soren had part of the half-elf bloodline, so he was born with high dexterity. His father was a high-grade thief, so he must have inherited some of his father's abilities. However, even with all these factors combined, his innate attribute was only 18 points. He could be considered a genius in this field. But what about Vivian's innate attribute? She had 21 points of charm when she had just awakened, which meant that she had broken through the innate attribute. Soren would be lying if he said that he did not suspect that she was the child of God. However, the problem was that they shared the same mother. Although Soren had some guesses, he could not be sure. However, the scene in front of him told him that if the probability of Vivian being the child of God was 25% at first, it had now increased to 50%. Could Vivian's father really be a god? Why would a god choose an ordinary human to give birth to a child? Judging by Soren's current ability, his mother was definitely a very ordinary human. This was because he did not have any innate attribute. Soren took a deep breath. His hand was already on the curved sword. He shook his head and said in a low voice, "I don't know. Vivian and I share the same mother but different fathers. If she really was the child of God, I would have noticed it long ago. However, she doesn't have any divine power in her body, so it's unlikely that she's the child of God. I've seen her father and he was just a powerful adventurer." Gloria was still frowning, but her expression softened a little. She said, "Then why did you decide to leave at this time? Don't tell me that this is all a coincidence." She glanced at Soren's hand on the curved sword and said softly, "You still don't believe me? Whether or not Vivian is the child of God, I like this little girl very much. If anything happens, I'll stand by her side. Are you still not going to tell me anything?" Soren hesitated for a moment and said, "If I tell you this, can you keep it a secret?" Gloria nodded without hesitation and said in a serious voice, "I'll keep it a secret." Good. Soren took a deep breath. His expression was very serious, but what he said was half true and half false. He said in a low voice, "I once found a secret underground cave built by a lich in Amber City. I even met a snake demon in it. I learned a terrible prophecy from it. The gods will lose their divine power and eventually fall to the mortal world. There will be endless slaughter in the abyss and hell, and the believers of the evil god will spread fear everywhere. The whole world will be plunged into war, and only the Frost Kingdom will be safe for the time being." While Soren was talking, Gloria had secretly cast lie detection. The effect of this spell wasn't absolute, but it could still detect the general truth and falsehood. She got the result that most of what Soren said was true. Although a small part of the answer was vague, most of the information was true. He didn't completely lie to her, and the feedback of the spell told her that he was probably telling the truth. There were more advanced spells that could predict the truth, but that required the help of the gods. Now that the gods had fallen into silence, the only spell that could be used was the enhanced lie detector version of the lie detector. How was this possible? The gods would lose their divine power and fall to the mortal world? What would the mortal world be like then? Would it be a chaotic battle between the gods? Gloria didn't have the energy to think about what Soren was vague about, because the news she heard had made her thoughts chaotic. She certainly knew a little about the gods losing contact. The believers all over the world couldn't contact the gods, and this had caused a lot of panic. So what Soren said was probably true. If the gods really fell to the mortal world and the abyss and hell got involved, how chaotic would the whole world be? Liches were basically legendary. If this prophecy came from a lich, then it was very likely to be a legendary prophecy, and the probability of it being correct was at least above 50%. So that's why you insisted on going to the elves and then went to the Frost Kingdom? Gloria was silent for a long time, then looked at Soren and said in disbelief, "Then why is it so coincidental? Just when you were about to leave, the skinning incident happened and then Whiterun was attacked. There must be some connection, either it's related to you and me or it's related to Vivian. Both of them couldn't help but look at the little girl who was sleeping soundly. Whether it was Soren or Gloria, they didn't think that they had much to do with these things, so the most likely person was Vivian. Was she really the child of God? But why didn't she have any divine power? Why didn't they find anything after so many years? Whiterun. There were already several places in the bustling city that were on fire. The figure of the gray-robed sorcerer flew up into the sky. There were continuous sounds of battle on the ground. At the same time, in the most central position of the city, there seemed to be a high-pitched roar of a dragon. A dazzling light soared into the sky. Following that, a majestic legendary warrior with a full body of blood-red heavy armor stepped out. He was holding a strange long sword in his hand, which was burning with raging flames. Dragon-slaying sword? The beautiful woman's figure appeared in a corner. She glanced over there and murmured, "Did that guy finally pull out the cursed weapon? Forget it, I don't care so much. I'll take this opportunity to leave this place. The drool who are monitoring me seems to be very busy recently. It seems that I really have to thank these troublemakers. Now I'm finally free." The light of a spell appeared, and the beautiful woman's figure disappeared into thin air. Chapter 94. In a dark underground trench. A group of black-robed fallen ones gathered in the surroundings. This place had already been opened up into a not small space. In the center there was a 10-meter-wide altar, surrounded by faint flames. Under the altar there was a huge array. He could also vaguely see a strange shadow in the vicinity. It was blurry and did not seem to be a physical body, but a half-spirit form. A priest wearing a dark red robe was kneeling under the altar. Dark warriors in heavy armor were scattered around him, looking around with cold gazes. "Your Excellency." The dark red figure under the altar spoke in a deep voice, "We still haven't found the first son of God. The descendant of the dragon slayer has pulled out the cursed weapon. We have suffered heavy losses. This place is far more powerful than Amber City. The members of the Drool Order have also appeared. Recently they have been very hostile to us. They think that we have broken the balance. What should we do next?" The dark flames turned into a blurry figure, and the voice of the high priest was as cold as the bones of the dead. He said angrily, "Who is it? Who is it that has repeatedly interfered with the Lord's arrangements? You bunch of trash still haven't found the first son of God? I have already given you the location of the prophecy in advance. Why did you wait until now to hold the ritual?" Whiterun is a very powerful city. There are many powerful beings here, including the members of the Northern Witches, the red-robed priest explained with a frightened expression. Whiterun is a very powerful city. There are many powerful beings here, including members of the Northern Witches. We waited until the Whiterun guards left to deal with the ogre tribe. After the Storm Lord left, we found the right time to hold the ritual. We have lost all our dread knights in Amber City. We are not very well staffed now. Your Excellency, I have tried my best. Trash. The shadow roared angrily. He raised his hand and pointed forward. The head of the priest in the dark red robe exploded like a watermelon. He glanced at the believers below and pointed at them. From today onwards you are the new priest of fear. The Lord will grant you divine power to increase your strength. Now get the others to prepare immediately. We will spread the sacred ritual throughout the south. The power of fear will awaken all the sons of God. You must find the whereabouts of the first son of God as soon as possible. The black-robed fallen one stood up in fear and trepidation and said cautiously, "Your Excellency High Priest, if the ceremony were to begin, then all of the sons of God would gradually awaken, and the power of our Lord would be distributed to them. At that time, the whereabouts of the first divine child would be even more difficult to find. Moreover, with the other sons of God awakening ahead of time, the power of the first son of God will be greatly weakened. This is not conducive to our plan to resurrect Master." The high priest looked at him coldly and said, "I know. But you useless trash have already missed the opportunity, and the prophecy has already deviated. Now he could only awaken all the sons of God and strengthen the power of fear through the slaughter. Although the Lord's divine power will be scattered, the power of fear will still exist in this world. As long as all the other sons of God die, all the divine power will automatically converge on the first son of God. Your task is to ensure that the first son of God can survive until the end of the ceremony. He is the strongest but also the weakest. Only then can the Lord's will be resurrected in him." Whiterun. The Storm Lord's figure leaped on the street. Suddenly she stopped and jumped on the roof. She stared at a warrior in blood-red heavy armor in the distance and asked in a deep voice, "Why did you pull out the Dragon Slayer sword?" The warrior in blood-red armor stopped and looked at her coldly. "We have lost contact with the gods. The coming chaos can be foreseen. Whiterun needs the power of this sword." The Stormlord's expression was very stiff. "Don't you know the curse on it?" "I know." The heavy armor warrior clenched the long sword in his hand and said slowly, "The owner of this sword will die in the hands of the giant dragon. It has killed 12 giant dragons, and the 5 previous owners also died in the hands of the giant dragon. But I am the guardian of Whiterun. You are just an outsider. This city should be protected by me. This is the mission that I was born with." Crackling lightning flashed violently. The Stormlord's expression was very ugly. She seemed to be very angry. She took a deep breath and turned to leave. She coldly said, "Stupid guy. The curse on this sword is more terrible than you think. You will regret this sooner or later." In the calm wilderness, Soren and Gloria looked at each other, speechless. The flames in the distance had dissipated, and it seemed that Whiterun was not hit by the meteor shower. At this moment, Vivian, who was in the carriage, suddenly trembled. Her cute little face revealed a trace of fear. Her white little hands randomly grabbed something, and the expression on her face became more and more terrified. She curled up in the corner of the carriage and muttered, "Go away. You bunch of monsters. All of you get out of my way. If you don't go away, my brother will kill you all. Why are you still not going away? If you don't go away, I'm going to call you brother." Soren's expression changed slightly. He quickly rushed into the carriage and reached out to hold Vivian's small hand. He said anxiously, "Vivian, what's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?" Gloria's expression also changed slightly. She anxiously followed them into the carriage and bumped into Soren. She grabbed Vivian's hand and shook it gently. "Wake up. Vivian, wake up. Did you have a nightmare?" The little girl slowly opened her eyes. She first looked around timidly. When she saw Soren's figure, she rushed over and desperately drilled into his arms like a kitten. Her little hand was still holding on tightly to the corner of his clothes. When he heard the conversation between the two, he nodded with lingering fear and said in a low voice, "Yes. Vivian saw a lot of monsters, fire and blood." "Monsters?" Soren and Gloria looked at each other. While comforting the frightened little girl, he asked, "What kind of monsters?" Vivian tried to recall what she saw, and her little face turned pale. She whispered, "They were very, very big monsters. Their bodies were on fire and they were very ugly. They had 2 horns on their heads, big wings on their backs, and a tail like a cow's. Their feet also seemed to be hooves. They surrounded me and said something, and they were very angry at me. I'm not afraid of them. I told them that if they came near me again, I'll call you brother." And then they disappeared. "Demons?" Soren's face turned pale. He looked at Gloria and then nodded gently. He carefully comforted the little girl. When she gradually calmed down, Gloria signaled outside the carriage. Soren covered Vivian with a blanket, and looked at her little hand that was holding the corner of his clothes. He said softly, "I'm just outside. I have something to tell Sister Gloria, and I'll come in to accompany you soon." "Okay." Vivian nodded obediently. She let go of her little hand and sat on the side of the carriage. Soren walked out with a stiff expression. Gloria seemed to have set up a magic barrier. She looked at him and asked, "You don't know about this either?" "Yes." Soren nodded seriously. Gloria looked inside the carriage and then slowly said, "Vivian might really be a god's child, and she might even be the child of the Abyss Demon God." Soren didn't answer, but his hand tightened on his curved sword. His muscles tensed up as if he was going to attack in the next moment. "Why are you so cautious?" Gloria was so angry that she raised her eyebrows. She pointed at Soren and said angrily, "Do you think I'll harm you just because she's a god's child? I've done so much recently, and you still don't see me as a friend?" Soren relaxed a little, but his hand was still on the hilt of his sword. He said softly, "I'm sorry. I was too nervous. You know what Vivian and I went through in the past. I can't completely trust other people." Gloria's expression softened a little. She sighed and said, "You must have had a hard time in the past." Soren didn't answer. He only said, "I don't remember Vivian's birth father very well. If she really is a god's child, then things are very serious." "Yes." Gloria looked inside the carriage with a hint of pity on her face. She said slowly, "The demon gods of the deep abyss usually give birth to children for a certain purpose. The biggest possibility is that a demon god of the deep abyss foresaw his own death and left behind a god's child in the mortal world. After he died, he used the god's child's body to revive. 2 demon gods did this before. One was the god of massacre, and the other was the god of tyranny. The god of massacre failed. The god's child he left behind destroyed him. In the end, the god of massacre fell into the hands of another god. However, the god of tyranny succeeded. He revived in the body of his child. That pitiful god's child didn't even have time to react before he was stripped of his divinity and died. The god of tyranny revived from his broken body. Gloria sighed and said slowly, "If Vivian really is a god's child, then her future is destined to be very difficult." Soren's palms were very pale because he used too much strength. He stared at Gloria and said with an unquestionable tone, "I will kill her. I will completely destroy her. If I can't find her in the mortal world, I will go to the abyss and kill her. No one can hurt Vivian, not even a god." Gloria's gaze softened. She said softly, "This isn't just a battle of strength. It also requires willpower and faith. I think you need an ally." A white arm stretched out. This was the second time Soren held this hand, but the meaning was completely different. Chapter 95. Yesterday's winner was SBJSN. His message was, "What is fan points? Please go to the book group and contact the 8 cats to receive the award. Are you here to be a bystander? How are those face warriors supposed to endure this? There's still one last day. It's still the original post. This is the last chance. The face warriors have to seize the opportunity." In a dark room, a young man suddenly woke up with a scream. His whole body was dripping with cold sweat. There were traces of tears on the bed. His palm was pierced by his fingertips because of excessive force. Drops of blood dripped down his fingers. "Devil?" He held his head in pain, knocked his forehead fiercely and murmured, "Why would I dream of something like a devil?" There were sounds of insects all around. The young man pushed the door open and went out. This was a small manor. It seemed that his family was very well off. He stood in the moonlight wearing a thin shirt. The weather was a little cold at this time, but he didn't seem to care at all. The young man stood outside and took a deep breath to calm down. Only then did he calm down a little. He looked down at his palm. He didn't know when the wound on his palm had healed. The blood cut by his fingernails had now become very shallow. He seemed to be in disbelief. He raised his palm and observed it under the moonlight. Only then did he confirm that the wound was almost healed. If he looked carefully, he could even see the marks slowly disappearing little by little. How is this possible? He looked at himself with a face full of surprise. He suddenly found that he could see things in the night. Although he could see more or less before, it was definitely not as clear as now. He looked around in disbelief and murmured, "What's wrong with me? What happened?" In a secluded monastery, a woman's muffled scream came from the room, and the door was suddenly knocked open. Then a middle-aged nun rushed in. She raised her hand and chanted a spell, and a faint light appeared on her fingertips. She looked at the girl in front of her with some worry. The girl was wearing very ordinary linen clothes and looked very delicate and pretty. At the moment, she was holding her head in pain, and her expression was somewhat distorted. "Ariana, what happened to you?" The old nun reached out and hugged the girl in front of her. She kept shaking her, trying to wake her up, but the girl still seemed to be in a nightmare. Her face was getting paler and paler. "Protect from evil." The old nun quickly cast a spell, and a holy light appeared and enveloped the young girl's body. The young girl's expression became calmer, and then she slowly opened her eyes. She cried out in fear and threw herself into the arms of the old nun, sobbing, "Mother Isolo, I just saw the demon again." The old nun held her hand tightly and said in a low voice, "Hurry up and pray to Lady Silvermoon. The goddess will protect her believers." The girl trembled as she stood up, kneeled on the bed and began to pray. As she prayed, little bits of holy light appeared, and the divine power of the monastery began to converge on her body. The girl's fearful expression became calmer and calmer. This was a monastery that worshipped the Lady of Silvermoon. Ever since the Lady of Silvermoon took control of a part of the priesthood to protect women, many of these monasteries, made up entirely of nuns, had thrown themselves into the embrace of the Lady of Silvermoon. The Church of the Lady of Silvermoon had undergone a lot of changes over the years. The number of female priests among the believers was increasing, and the Church gradually regarded women as a symbol of motherhood and the source of women's power. Women began to play a very important role in many rituals. This meant that the Lady of Silver Moon was likely to involve more priesthoods because there were many priesthoods that extended from women, and nursing. If the Lady of Silver Moon integrated these priesthoods, it was very likely that she would regain her divine power. The holy light gradually dissipated. The girl finally stood up calmly. She glanced at the old nun in front of her and whispered, "I can't get rid of the demons in my heart. They are making me more and more afraid. Mother Isolo, is it because my faith in the Lady of Silver Moon is not firm enough?" The old nun reached out and hugged her, patted her back gently and said slowly, "My dear Ariana, you are definitely the most devout believer of the goddess. Please believe me, the goddess will never allow the demons to hurt you. She has been watching you. She loves you as if you were her own daughter." In the dark basement, in the small village in the wilderness, in the silent castle, similar scenes kept happening. That night, many people woke up from their nightmares. When they opened their eyes, the whole world had changed. In a gloomy canyon, a bewitching man stood under the moonlight. He stared into the distance with a strange smile on his face as he murmured, "My dear brothers and sisters, you have finally woken up. I have been waiting for this moment for a long time." His figure flew out and directly jumped down from the cliff that was dozens of meters high. Then his figure gradually blurred and flew into the distance. In a place further north than the far north, there were glaciers and mountains all around, and the sea could be seen in the distance. However, it was completely frozen in this season. In this snowy country where there were few people, a tall tower stood in the middle of the sky. Its height was beyond the estimation of mortals. Even if Soren was here, he would have doubted that the technological civilization of the interstellar era could build such a strange yet stable tower that stood in the cold for thousands of years without any damage. "Teacher." A handsome young man came to the top of the tower. This was an ancient astrology platform. He stood respectfully at the back and said softly, "The believers of the Dread Lord have begun to spread chaos and fear. They have awakened the Son of God in advance. Should we do something now?" An old man with white hair and a beard turned around. He was wearing a gray wizard robe, and his white beard almost touched the ground. He glanced at the apprentice behind him and slowly said, "My adored, you must always remember that we are observers. Our mission is to observe the changes in this world, not to interfere." The handsome young man seemed to be hesitant. He struggled for a while before refuting, "But teacher, if we don't interfere, the Dread Lord will use the bodies of his children to resurrect. Then the world will be shrouded in the shadow of fear again. This is a powerful demon god. If we miss this opportunity, I'm afraid it will be difficult to have another chance to make him fall in the future." The old man sighed softly and slowly said, "My adored, you must remember that we are neutral. We are neither righteous nor evil. Only then will the gods allow us to continue existing. Moreover, it is not that easy to resurrect a god." The handsome young man seemed to be unconvinced. He whispered, "Then why did the god of tyranny succeed?" The old man seemed to be helpless. He looked at the disciple in front of him and said slowly, "Many conditions have to be met for the gods to be resurrected. The bodies of mortals can't bear their power, even if these people are their descendants. Therefore they will extract their divine power before they resurrect and gradually distribute it to their children. The stronger the divine power, the more children they need to share it with. After they die, this divine power will gradually gather. Many of the children they leave behind will fight and kill for the sake of power. In the end, the number of children with divine power will decrease, and the remaining children will become more and more powerful. Powerful children and the gathered divine power are only part of the resurrection of a god. The most important thing is the power of faith. All divine power is generated by the conversion of faith from the priesthood. The most important part is the control of the power of faith. The body of the Son of God has the divine power brought about by the priesthood, but they are not the gods that the believers believe in and pray to. If the believers are still praying to the original God, then the will of the Son of God can rely on the faith to gather the divine power in the body. He lurks in the body of the Son of God for a long time, using the power of faith to repair his soul, and finally completely take back the power that the Son of God inherited. Therefore, the resurrection of the God of massacre failed. Because his chief priest betrayed him, his believers stopped praying to him. But the God of tyranny was resurrected because his believers still maintained their faith. The handsome boy seemed to understand. He raised his head and said, "Teacher, does that mean that the Dread Lord will not be resurrected this time?" The old man was so angry that he knocked the boy's head with his wooden staff and said in a deep voice, "Always remember that we are neutral observers. No one can predict the future. But the churches of the gods will definitely not allow the believers of the Dread Lord to spread chaos everywhere. It will not be long before they suffer a serious blow. If the believers of the Dread Lord are greatly reduced, then he will lose the source of the power of faith. Without enough believers praying in his name, even if a child of God succeeds in meeting the conditions for his resurrection, he will never be resurrected. The handsome boy still did not understand. But he could roughly tell that the possibility of the Dread Lord's resurrection was not high, so he looked very happy and said cheerfully, "Teacher, I will make tea for you. I'll make tea for you with your favorite southern tea leaves." The old man sighed helplessly. He kept looking in the direction of the extreme north. His gaze seemed to pass through space and saw a gorgeous curtain of light. The curtain of light sprinkled down from the sky and looked so beautiful. Chapter 96. The first rays of the morning sun shone on the plains. Soren drove the carriage forward. The road became a lot bumpy, so they didn't move very fast. Vivian sat in front of the long table in the carriage, sitting upright with her legs crossed. There was a mirror in front of her, and Gloria was behind her, combing her hair. Speaking of which, Soren wasn't a good brother. There were a lot of things that the little girl took care of herself, and he didn't have the energy to pay attention to so many trivial things. Gloria's appearance seemed to make up for this emptiness. She seemed to be playing the role of a mother. With a gentle smile on her face, she carefully combed the little girl's hair into a beautiful ponytail. "It's done." Gloria tied the long hair with a pink hair band, picked up the mirror and looked in front of Vivian. She smiled and said, "It's very beautiful. Our Vivian looks like a little princess." The little girl smiled sweetly. She looked in front of the mirror, stroked the hair band lovingly, and thanked Gloria behind her. "Thank you, Sister Gloria. It's really beautiful." After that, the little girl rolled her big eyes and whispered, "I don't want to be a princess or I'll be taken away by the dragon." Gloria couldn't help but laugh. She reached out and stroked the little girl's long hair and said helplessly, "Naughty." Soren was chewing the jerky in his mouth. When he heard the sound behind him, he couldn't help but smile. He looked back at the two of them and then continued to drive the carriage forward. Perhaps because of what happened yesterday, their relationship had become a lot closer. The northern witch in front of him was really different from the one Soren had seen before. The more he interacted with her, the more he found her shining points. She was beautiful, elegant, and gentle. When she spoke, her eyes could affect one's mood. She was really a good woman. Perhaps the arrogance at the beginning was just a disguise. After all, everyone wore a mask on their face. Take Soren for example. Most of the time he appeared cold and distant. This was to prevent others from observing his emotions and thoughts. Another example would be Vivian. Most of the time she was a well-behaved little girl in the eyes of others, but in fact she was also a little mischievous. This was something that even the priestess who was close to her did not notice. Only Soren, who was closest to her, and Gloria, who was in front of her, could tell that the little girl could be very mischievous at times. This was a very good thing. The mischievous Vivian was better than the well-behaved Vivian, because Soren had always been worried that she was too well-behaved and would not be able to adapt. If she really was the divine child, then it would be a fatal thing. One's soul could remain pure, but one's thoughts could not be pure. Pure people would find it difficult to survive in this dangerous world. A large herd of wild goats could be seen in the distance. There were many wild beasts like this in the wilderness. They did not have powerful abilities and could only rely on the herd to survive and protect themselves. Usually, a small number of ferocious leaders would be born from these goats. They were stronger than the rest of the herd, and had a creature level of 3 to 5. Sometimes they would even dare to fight with wolves. This was very similar to humans. In humans, the strong protected the weak and maintained the space for them to survive. The leader of the goats discovered the carriage in the distance. It let out a low cry, and its thick horns nudged the lambs beside it, driving them into the plains. The leader of the goats enjoyed the most beautiful green grass. In order to ensure that the strongest offspring had the most mates, they were also responsible for protecting them when they encountered danger. When they could not fight back, they would find the most effective way to escape, and the rest of the herd would follow them. They were under the protection of the droll. If it was only a small-scale hunt for survival, the droll would not interfere. However, if it was a large-scale hunt, the droll would appear with their anger. They stubbornly maintained the balance of nature. If there were too many goats, they would also mercilessly kill some of them to ensure that the green grass would not be eaten clean. Paladins were annoying and so were the droll. Vivian sat in the carriage and read. The little girl was more sensible than before. The speed at which she absorbed knowledge surprised both of them. Vivian had already read 1/3 of the books that Gloria carried with her. One had to know that there were hundreds of books as thick as bricks, and they were filled with dense professional knowledge. Although she had only memorized it for now, as long as she was given some time, she would definitely become a knowledgeable spellcaster. Knowledge was more important to a spellcaster than spell slots. The more powerful a spellcaster was, the more knowledge they needed. The wilderness was much calmer than before. Most of the monsters had voluntarily migrated to this area, and they would not dare to come close for a long time. However, there were still some scattered kobolds and goblins. These creatures were basically everywhere, and the Whiterun guards did not have the time to deal with them. At most, a new nest of them would be born next year. In the afternoon, Soren met a traveler. The traveler belonged to a race that was relatively rare in the south. It was also a very popular race. It was a halfling. He was very small, only about 1 meter tall. He wore child-sized clothes and had 2 short swords at his waist. Although they were swords, they looked more like daggers to Soren. The halfling did not have a lot of fur on his body, especially on his feet and the back of his hands. He probably weighed only about 30 to 40 pounds. He used a strong rope to hold the 2 goblins. From time to time he would kick them a few times, driving the 2 little monsters in the wilderness forward. When he saw the carriage in the distance, he immediately jumped up in excitement and waved at Soren. "Hey, can you give me a ride?" Gloria poked her head out to take a look, then naturally sat back down. The little girl looked at him and giggled as she gestured at his height. She then whispered into Soren's ear, "Big brother. It's a halfling. He's really only a little taller than Vivian." It was a very small and inconspicuous halfling. If they were in a place with dense weeds, they would not have been able to see him if he did not jump up. "You guys are lucky." The halfling untied the rope and kicked the 2 goblins. They immediately ran away. He put away the rope and whispered, "How dare you steal my food? You won't be so lucky next time." Soren slowed down the carriage slightly, and the halfling jumped up. He was very agile. He stroked the horse's back with his hand, then stepped on the thin rope and sat next to Soren. He smiled and said, "Thank you so much. I've been walking in the wilderness alone for many days. Finally I can take a break." Halflings were the best rogues. They were even more talented than Soren when it came to stealth. If they did not wear shoes, they would have an innate 20 points of stealth. They would not be able to hear any footsteps. "Hello, esteemed witch." "Hello, beautiful little girl." The halfling had good eyesight. He smiled and said hello, then looked at Soren who was sitting next to him and introduced himself. "Hello fellow traveler, my name is Aladdin. Aladdin, Tobacco, Noradam. I'm a rogue and a gourmet who has traveled around the world." "Nice to meet you." Soren did not answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched when he heard the name. Vivian was very curious. She walked up to the halfling and pinched his baby face. Aladdin was not angry. He smiled and let her touch him. He blinked and said, "Little girl, is this the first time you've seen a halfling? This is what I look like. I'm about the same height as you." Halflings had good tempers. They were a race that was easy to produce good people. They were favored by many gods, and they were a race that greatly respected the gods. Even if the gods were weak, the halflings would still show their respect to them. They were the #1 foodies in the world. They were also the race with the most gourmets. Many of the curious halflings would try all the delicacies in the world before traveling. Most of the time, it was easy for them to gain the favor of other races. If they encountered bad people, they could easily escape with their skills. They were a race that was favored by the goddess of luck. Among all intelligent creatures, halflings were the only race with a natural bonus of luck. If a halfling was blessed by the gods, they would have an additional ability called Hero's Luck, which gave them a bonus of 1 point in any situation. This race was often seen in many epic legends. They were the best companions of epic protagonists and were very willing to help those they recognized. However, they were very weak and relied more on their agility in battle. Quite a large number of halflings did not even have 10 points of strength. The average strength of a halfling was only 8 points. A common halfling with 12 points of strength was already very high. There were not many halflings. Most of them were active in the Shire and Roder area. The population was at most a few 100,000, and they had not expanded for thousands of years. They were protected by the halfling guardian goddess, Yaltanka. She was an ancient powerful god, and the halflings had been living under her protection for countless years. They were very curious, but they had no intention of fighting for supremacy. If no one disturbed them, these little halflings were born to be optimistic. They liked to grow tobacco, brew liquor, and pursue good food. That's right. They also liked to brag. They especially liked to sit down with a pipe in their mouth, take a deep puff, and then start bragging to others. So when Aladdin took out his pipe and took out the special tobacco from his pocket, Soren knew that he was going to brag to Vivian. He had seen this scene more than once. Chapter 97. That's right. Aladdin took a deep puff from his pipe and blew out a fist-shaped smoke ring. His expression was very rich as he said in a deep voice, "At that time, there were 20 terrifying ogres surrounding me. Their arms were as thick as my waist, and they were holding huge spiked maces in their hands. When they swung their maces, the sound of the wind was very frightening. If I was careless, my head would have been smashed by them." He held the pipe and gestured the size of the spiked maces. He even pretended to wipe off the cold sweat on his forehead. Suddenly, he lowered his voice and said, "The situation at that time was very dangerous. I tried my best to dodge their attacks and a few of them just brushed past my clothes. But thank Lady Luck, these slow guys didn't hit me at all. Instead, I used my short sword to cut their thighs. I found a wooden barrel in front of me, so I ran with all my might. This difficult battle lasted for a long time. Finally, these heavy guys couldn't take it anymore and I knocked them down one by one. Yes. After that, I calmly left the ogre's nest." It had to be said that his storytelling skills were very good. Although Soren knew that he was bragging, he couldn't help but feel that it was very interesting. Even Gloria, who was beside him, leaned over and listened with interest. With the thickness of the fat on the ogres' bodies, it was already good enough that the 2 short swords in his hands could cut through the fat layer. 20 ogres, after deducting the fat, were at most 4 or 5. Perhaps because of their small size, the halfling liked to use exaggerated metaphors to describe himself. Vivian, who was beside him, listened very seriously. The little girl liked to listen to stories, especially when the halfling was about the same height as her. It was very immersive to listen to stories. Stories about halflings were very popular among human children because they could imagine themselves as halflings in battle. Time passed quickly like this. Perhaps it was because of the lively halfling, the journey was much more cheerful. From time to time, he would tell stories of his adventures to Vivian. Although the content of the stories was exaggerated, it was obvious that he had been to a lot of places and encountered a lot of difficult characters. Soren couldn't determine his profession level, but it seemed that Aladdin should be a grade 3 rogue, and he seemed to be good at making mechanisms and alchemy. He also gave Vivian several exquisite gadgets. They were all made with alchemy and mechanical techniques. The little girl received more and more gifts. The guards of the caravan gave her quite a lot, and so did Gloria. Even Gloria's mother, who was mean and unscrupulous to Soren, also gave her some small gifts. Now the little girl had a special multi-dimensional bag, which was filled with all the gifts she had received. In the evening, Soren untied the horses and let them graze while he began to prepare dinner. Aladdin volunteered to let them have a taste of the food made by a gourmet who traveled around the world. Soren missed the food made by the halfling. He looked at Vivian's longing expression and immediately nodded in agreement. There was a river next to the foothold. The halfling quickly took out a few sticks from the bag and assembled a fishing rod in the blink of an eye. He first set up a campfire, took out a small pot and put water in it. He also took out some mushrooms and spices. "I picked this up in the woods today. I've tasted it and it's delicious." Aladdin poured some fine salt into the pot, then took the fishing rod and walked to the river. He said as he walked, "Wait for me for a while. When the soup is boiling, I'll catch the fish. I'm a fishing master in my hometown." Vivian curiously followed him, and Gloria also came to the side with great interest. Aladdin looked at the little girl beside him and smiled. "Do you want to give it a try? I have a fishing rod here." "Okay." Vivian quickly nodded her little head. So, the halfling took out a few more sticks, reassembled a fishing rod, and handed it to the little girl. Vivian held the fishing rod with her little white hands, and imitated Aladdin's action of throwing the bait into the river. The halfling looked back at the campfire, then sat by the river and continued to brag. "In my hometown, the Shire, there's a fishing competition every autumn. The first place gets a very good prize. Basically, as long as I'm in my hometown, I'll definitely be the champion of the fishing competition." So when those guys heard that I was going on a trip, they were immediately overjoyed. They were eager to win this year's fishing competition. Soren didn't know how many times the halfling bragged that he was the champion of the fishing competition. He probably won the fishing competition before, but it was hard to say whether he was the champion every year. Moreover, the fishing competition was part of the halflings' autumn celebration. Every halfling village would hold such a competition. The halfling Aladdin was still talking about his most glorious achievements and how many fish he had caught. Vivian's fishing float moved a little. The little girl excitedly held the fishing rod and whispered, "Sister Gloria, come here quickly." The fish took the bait. Gloria didn't seem to have fished much. She walked behind her with great interest and whispered, "Don't worry, wait for a while. It hasn't taken the bait yet." The noble northern witch naturally didn't prepare food by herself. If she needed to eat fish, someone would definitely send it to her immediately. "Don't worry." Aladdin looked over and was immediately surprised. "Lucky little girl, slow down. It looks like a big fish." Soren was preparing to roast the fish over the fire. Suddenly, Vivian's yelling came from the river. Her little body was dragged forward by the fishing rod. Gloria, who was next to her, immediately reached out and hugged her. Then both of them began to yell. The halfling on the side also shouted, saying something like, "Slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down." Soren looked over with a smile, then slowly walked over. Vivian's cute little face was flushed red, and her breathing was a little messy. She was holding a 30-centimeter long fish tightly with both hands. She raised the fish in front of Soren and said excitedly, "Brother, look." Vivian caught a big fish. The fish was probably close to 12 pounds. Such a big fish had a lot of strength in the water. It wasn't easy to catch it, and the fishing line would break if you didn't control it well. Soren glanced at Gloria next to him. After seeing the smile on her face, he immediately understood that she had used the magician's hand. Otherwise, it would be impossible to catch it without some skill. Generally, it was difficult to catch fish that weighed more than 5 pounds. Soren reached out and touched her little head. He took the fish and said, "Vivian, good job. It's up to you today." The little girl nodded happily. Her little face was full of joy. She was always easy to satisfy. As long as it was something interesting, it could make her happy for a long time. Soren pulled out his dagger and cut open the fish's belly. On the other side, Vivian was still fishing very seriously. She whispered softly, hoping that the fish would take the bait quickly. She didn't know if she was particularly lucky, but she actually caught a second fish immediately. On the other hand, Aladdin, who had been bragging for a long time, didn't even take the bait. When the little girl caught the third fish, he finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He put down the fishing rod and jumped into the river. After a while, there was no trace of him. Then his head popped out with a big fish in his hand. He raised it high towards Vivian and laughed, "I caught it. I caught it." The two people present were a little speechless. They didn't have much to eat. The halfling put away the fishing rod. Seeing the little girl's unsatisfied look, he simply gave her the other fishing rod. Then he began to prepare dinner, taking out bags of seasonings from his pocket. Some of them were used to make fish soup and some were used to grill fish. Soren even smelled a fragrance similar to cumin. The halfling was a race that was best at cooking. Many rare seasonings were only available in their hands. It had to be said that his cooking was really good. This meal should be the most delicious meal Soren had ever eaten since he came to this world. Vivian's little belly was bulging, and Gloria also tasted a lot. It seemed that his title as a gourmet was not a bluff. His cooking skills were definitely at the level of a master. It was the third day of the trip. Soren met a halfling gourmet. His destination was the mountain fortress, and he was going to try the Iron Dwarf's blazing fire wine. They would travel together to Autumnfall and then part ways. Chapter 98. Next to a warm bonfire. Aladdin was preparing some snacks for supper. It was actually sliced meat, sprinkled with spices and roasted. In the storyline, the original halflings were people who knew how to enjoy themselves. They would spend at least half of their wealth on making themselves more comfortable. Moreover, the halflings would not be adventuring for a long time. They would often choose to return home and retire after making a fortune. Vivian couldn't eat anymore, and Gloria also burped, which was a rare occurrence. She then entered the carriage with a slightly red face. Soren's appetite was very good. The stronger one's physique, the better their digestive ability. His appetite had doubled compared to before. For example, he now carried jerky with him, mainly in case he didn't have time to cook during a battle. He could just use jerky for a period of time, and it would be much better when he broke through to grade 4. At that time, his endurance would be greatly strengthened, and it wouldn't be a problem even if he didn't eat for 7 or 8 days. He knew a little about barbecue. The two sat by the bonfire and ate meat. Perhaps it was because there was a gourmet beside him, but Soren unexpectedly unlocked the cooking skill. Now it was already 20 points. There were many types of basic skills. In addition to the ability to directly affect combat, there were also skills such as forging, cooking, tailoring, and so on. These skills weren't very useful, and very few people would specifically train in them. Weapon forging and armor forging had their limits, and if one wanted to create rare-grade equipment they had to use alchemy. Among them, the most typical was the wizard robes. Many high-grade robes required special materials, such as the tough spider silk from the Underdark. Ordinary tailors would not be able to make clothes with this kind of spider silk. As for wizards themselves, you couldn't expect them to be proficient in the art of sewing when they already had so many things to learn. Therefore, high-grade rare-grade items had always been very rare. Aladdin leaned against the carriage and smoked his pipe. He also handed a small bag of tobacco to Soren and said with a smile, "Try the tobacco of the Norodotus family. This is the best tobacco in the north of the Shire." Soren didn't refuse. He reached out his hand and lit it up. He basically didn't drink. When necessary he could use tobacco to ease his pain. Sometimes he could use it to distract himself from his injuries. The tobacco grown by the halflings was hard to buy even if you had the money. It was something that many wizards were passionate about. When lit, it would have a faint fragrance that could help to refresh one's mind. The effect was similar to Gloria's incense, but tobacco was mostly a hobby of male wizards. The night gradually deepened. The halfling spread out a blanket, then rolled it up and went to sleep. No one knew if he was asleep or not. After all, it was difficult for rogues to fall asleep. Rogues had the most important tasks in the adventure team. They had to be vigilant at all times. If they were ambushed, rogues would definitely be the first to be questioned. That was why for a long time rogues liked to travel alone because their tasks were too difficult. When they encountered dangerous terrain they had to walk at the front. They had to deal with the traps. At night, the mages were meditating, the warriors were sleeping, and the rogues had to be vigilant at all times. When it was safe they had to take some time to rest. It was okay to have a high-level ranger to replace them. If there were not many dangerous places the warriors would be useless. They wouldn't even know when the enemy had sneaked in. It was still a solo activity. They could leave and stay as they pleased. It was quite comfortable. There was a faint howl from a wolf in the distance. Soren sat in the carriage to rest. Vivian pulled the corner of his clothes with her small hand. Soren smiled and touched her little head, indicating that she didn't need to enter the carriage. Although the halfling was very friendly, he still wouldn't take it lightly. Even if there was a warning circle set up by the witches, he still thought that he would feel more at ease if he kept watch at night. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to sleep well at night. The weather was getting colder and colder. Winter might come earlier this year. It seemed that it would be much colder than previous years. Aladdin gradually fell into a deep sleep. He probably didn't want to travel with them, but to be able to have a good sleep. He probably wouldn't dare to sleep peacefully in the wilderness. Soren sat upright with a blanket covering him. Occasionally he would stand up and walk carefully, listening to the sounds in the distance. It was the sound of the wolves discovering the bonfire, but they were smart enough not to disturb it. If the wolves weren't very hungry, they would still eat wild animals as their staple food. Attacking travelers would reduce their population, and it would be difficult for them to reproduce. The next morning, Soren's body was covered with a layer of white frost. The weather was really cold. Soren, who had 20 points of constitution, didn't care much about it. However, when Vivian woke up and saw the frost on his eyebrows, her small face showed a distressed expression. She used her small hands to wipe the frost off his body. She opened her small mouth and blew on it. She held his hand and rubbed it hard. "Brother? Are you cold?" Soren kissed her forehead and smiled. "I'm not cold. This cold is nothing." The weather had really changed. When he woke up in the morning there was a layer of white mist. Gloria frowned and whispered, "This year's winter came earlier than before." Soren nodded slightly but didn't say anything. After Aladdin woke up he first moved around a bit. Then he began to look for dry firewood to make porridge. He had everything he needed. After a simple meal, the group continued their journey. Perhaps because the road ahead was cleared by the caravan, they didn't encounter any monsters along the way. This journey lasted for 2 days until the 5th day they finally arrived at the city of Autumnfall. This was the territory of the half-elves. Half-elves were very common here. They had slightly pointed ears, slimmer and more flexible bodies than humans, and obviously more beautiful faces. However, most of the half-elves had been mixed many times. The proportion of human blood was very large, and the proportion of elf blood was reduced. The villages were similar to human villages, but there were many more arrow towers. There were many longbowmen here more than the elves. This was because the elves' strength was not as good as humans. Although they were agile, they were easy to get tired when using a longbow. Humans had enough strength, but their skills were not good. It took too much time to train a longbowman. It was far less than crossbowmen and ordinary archers. The half-elves combined the advantages of both sides. They had good strength, but they also inherited the elves' talent in archery. Almost every village here had a longbowman, and some towns could even see longbowman guards. Among all the mixed races, the half-elves had the best life. The others, such as the half-orcs, were now either slaves or wandering around. It was very xenophobic here. The half-elves were more resistant to any creatures that were not half-elves. They would look at outsiders with vigilant eyes. This was because they had been ostracized in both human and elf societies. The so-called racial harmony was just a slogan promoted by idealists. Soren and the others did not stop and went straight to Autumnfall. Finally, they arrived at Autumnfall on the 6th day of their journey. Okay, I'm going to the Iron Dwarfs. The little halfling jumped down from the carriage, waved at Vivian, who was about the same height as him, and then left freely. Goodbye, lovely little girl. Goodbye, Your Excellency Witch. Goodbye, fellow travelers. If you have time to travel to the Shire, I'll treat you to grilled sturgeon. Parting was a very normal thing. Even adventurers who had been together for a long time would have a time to say goodbye. There was a hint of disappointment on Vivian's face, but she quickly recovered. She smiled as she sorted out the gifts she had received, and her little face was full of joy. She actually liked the halfling because he gave her a feeling of a little friend. Compared to other children, she was still too smart and mature. So only the halfling, who looked like an adult but was the size of a child, made the little girl feel the joy of meeting a little friend. Autumnfall had the style of the elves. Most of them believed in the elven gods, and a small number of them would join other faiths. The half-elves also had their own gods, but they were very weak. They were only weak gods and could not protect them at all. Autumnfall was full of sycamore trees. In autumn, the leaves would fall, which looked very poetic. They worshipped the legendary immortal bird, so they also liked sycamore trees very much. There were many names for the immortal bird. The monks liked to call it the phoenix, the priests called it the sunbird, and the wizards named it the arcane ashes. It existed during the Arcane Empire. After that, it was rare to see it. It was rarer than gods and more powerful than dragons. It was said that the fire elemental god, who had great divine power in the elemental plane, extended an olive branch to them. These beautiful and deadly creatures had long left the world. Legend said that they would leave behind gorgeous flames in the sky when they flew over, and when they landed, everything would turn into ashes. The flames on their bodies would only extinguish at the moment of death. This holy flame could cause hundreds of points of holy fire damage per second. So they were beautiful but could not be approached. There were two landmark buildings in Autumnfall. One was the statue of the immortal bird in the central square, which was 30 meters high and more than 20 meters wide with its wings spread out. The other was a domed tower more than 300 meters high. It was the site of the Autumnfall Council, which was the internal spellcaster council of the half-elves. These were not the most eye-catching things. What was more eye-catching was an iron pillar on the domed tower, which exuded a silver-white light. It was a bit dazzling under the sun. It was the brilliance of Mithril. The pillar that looked like a lightning rod was actually the legendary magic crystal cannon. In the imagination of mortals, magic crystal cannons should be very heavy cannons on the city walls, just like the cannons used by dwarves and gnomes in the story. With their poor imagination, it was difficult for them to determine what the legendary magic crystal cannon looked like. They could only imagine that a wizard would fill it with something called a magic crystal and then use a spell to trigger it to fire. Then, with a loud rumbling sound, the magic crystal cannon would knock down a giant dragon. Yes, that was the feeling. It was very exciting to think about. But in fact it was not so. The attack of the magic crystal cannon was not a parabola, but a straight line attack. It was simply a decoration on the city wall, and one shot could kill all of them. It was born in the Arcane Empire and was used with the floating city. The maximum attack range was 1,000 kilometers, and it could destroy the target from the air. That's right. Its full name was the Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon. In this world they were second only to the gods. They weren't beasts that could only spit out dragon breath. The dragons in this world could cast spells. While they had strong melee abilities, they were also equivalent to a warlock who was 2 or 3 levels lower. An adult dragon could release 8 circle spells, and a slightly stronger one could release 9 circle spells. They had the same number of spells as the wizards. However, the way they cast spells was similar to that of the warlocks. The types of spells they could cast were different because of the different types of dragon clan. The challenge of an adult dragon required a complete team of legendary adventurers to have a 50% chance of defeating it. Dragon disciple warlocks were the most typical profession among spellcasters. These guys had only inherited a third of the dragon's abilities. Perhaps they were influenced by the stories. There was once a person who went to slay a dragon in high spirits. As a result, the warrior was trapped by a maze spell. Then an advanced roar spell shocked the whole party. An hour later, the warrior came out of the maze. Except for the wizard who escaped by triggering a teleportation spell, the rest of his teammates were all dead. Of course, it was easy to deal with the dragon clan. For example, many white dragons' attacks were predictable. However, when faced with the cunning adult dragons, you would instantly realize that they were cheating. Even experienced adventurers would feel ashamed of their tactical arrangements. There was once a professional who calculated that if an adult dragon spell was given to a top adventurer, it could kill at least 3 legendary adventurers. Transformation, sneak attack, assassination, maze, trap, exile, monster siege, and so on. After a set of spells was used up, it would be the dragon's breath, dragon's wing attack, dragon's bite, and so on. After withstanding this set of attacks, you would have to face an adult dragon that was equivalent to a legendary melee warrior. Before Soren joined the team to slay the dragon clan, he had deduced the tactics at least 20 times. 6 quasi-legendary adventurers worked together to deduce the dragon clan's attack method for a day and a night before they finally set out to slay the dragon clan. Without any tactical deduction, without understanding the battle environment, the terrain of the dragon's nest, the distribution of monsters, and the emergency measures, there was only one result in the end, and that was the team being wiped out. There was once a demigod lich. Its way of fighting was to cast imprisonment spells. Many people thought that this was a weakness. When a group of legendary-level adventurers was about to go and kill the demigod lich, everyone was dumbfounded. It turned out that the demigod lich was just casting a binding spell which could bind souls, out of boredom. When he encountered real danger, the first thing he did was to cast the legendary-level spell, Time Stop. In an instant the whole group was stunned. Demon Summon, Projection, Vivisection, Dimensional Lock, Bigby's Vajra Palm, Law's Command, Shock, and Blasphemy. After a set of spells, the whole team was wiped out. Even the wizard could not escape. Since then, everyone had learned a lesson. Attacking while standing still would only lead to death. The enemy was not a stupid puppet that only knew how to play by the rules. Since they did not have the support of the goddess of luck, it was best to be more prepared. The group was ready to stay in Autumnfall for a day. The Northern Witch obviously did not know that the super arcane crystal pulse cannon had become a decoration, but she still looked over there in awe. Soren had not slept for a few days in a row, and now he was a little tired. He first booked 2 rooms and settled Vivian in. Then he packed up and got ready to go to bed. The city was relatively safe. If Vivian was really the child of God, then it was very likely that she was the child of fear. There were some things he did not mention to Gloria, but the territory close to the elves was the forbidden area of the Dread Lord. It was difficult for his believers and followers to penetrate the elven territory. So, for the time being they were still safe and there should be plenty of time. Soren also came here for a very important purpose, there was a special area near the Elven Kingdom. There was a legendary equipment there. And it was also a teleportation point connected to the Earth Elemental Plane. There, an Earth Elemental could bring nearly 3,000 Slaughter EXP. If he was lucky he could accumulate more than 30,000 Slaughter EXP there. But he could not deal with it alone. There were a total of 4 such special areas, distributed in the Frost Kingdom, the Elven Forest, the Lava Land, and the Forbidden Cloud Sea. This was a legendary quest. The 4 places represented the elemental forces of water, fire, earth, and air. Each place had a legendary equipment and when combined, it was a special item. It would summon the elders of the 4 elements, all of whom had a monster level of 24. Only by defeating them could he get the final item. A sealed shard of divinity, unknown. The descent of the gods not only brought destruction, but also endless opportunities. There were a lot of things in Soren's memory, but there were very few things that could be obtained. This was the easiest legendary equipment to obtain, and it was the easiest to obtain. Because the challenge rating of the Earth Elemental was only 9, It was about twice as strong as the snake demon from the abyss. Because the earth elemental moved slowly, it was the type that Soren could easily deal with. So if he had a helper, it should not be difficult to kill them. If he encountered the wind elemental, he would be finished. He would not even have a chance to make a move. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Soren's door was knocked on. He almost jumped up, picked up the curved sword beside the bed and rushed out. "What's wrong?" he asked in a deep voice. Gloria was outside the door with a serious face. She pointed outside and said, "Look." It was a snow-white world. He did not know when it started, but the outside was already covered in snow. The thickness of the snow was close to 15 centimeters. It was hard to believe that it fell overnight. How is this possible? Soren's face was also very serious. He murmured, "It's only the end of September, right? It's already snowing." Gloria raised her finger and pointed to the sky. She lowered her voice and said, "Could it be related to the sky? The gods?" Soren was not too sure. He replied, "It's possible." He had not been active in this area, so he was not very clear about whether it had snowed in advance. He estimated that no one would care too much if it had snowed. After all, too many things had happened at that time. However, snow in September was not a very good sign. Soren did not find out about many things until the gods came. If this heavy snow was really early for some reason, then it must be related to the gods who had mastered the ice and snow priesthood. Was it the Winter Maiden? Or the Ice Goddess? Didn't the chaos of the time of troubles not affect them? The events of the Frost Kingdom seemed to have started several years later. Could it be that this was already brewing? Some people were already busy sweeping the snow outside. From time to time, some people cursed the weather, especially the traveling caravans. They were almost stuck here. There was no way to leave with such heavy snow. They might have to stay here until next spring. In that case, all the money they earned along the way would be spent here. At the same time, many people were worried because it had started to snow so early. This winter would be very cold. If the monsters in the wilderness did not have enough food in advance, it was very likely that they would frequently launch attacks on other creatures. The sudden heavy snow would freeze a lot of animals to death. They might not be able to survive this winter. These small things did not seem to be serious, but the changes caused by them were very big. The natural world was always a chain reaction. P.S. It's cold. I was holding my notebook in bed and writing, but I fell asleep in the middle of the night. There are only 2 updates today. I will continue to update tomorrow. Let Fuda catch up on his sleep. Chapter 100. The natural world was always one of a kind. In the past, if there was not enough food in the wilderness during winter, they would attack other creatures nearby. Now that it was snowing more than a month earlier, the frequency of their attacks was probably higher. Although many of the natives did not have enough knowledge, their experience told them that this winter would not be too peaceful. Soren led Vivian downstairs and heard a familiar voice as soon as they reached the bottom of the inn. "Hey, hey, hey. I'm here, down there, I'm down there." Aladdin's small body could not be seen, only his voice could be heard. The innkeeper looked around and poked his head out with a smile. "Hello, halfling. Is there anything I can help you with?" Aladdin was so angry that he almost jumped onto the table. He took a deep breath and said, "Did you see a man and a woman bringing a little girl to stay here? I saw their carriage from outside." Soren's mouth twitched. He walked down the stairs and said, "Aladdin, we're here. Aren't you going to the Iron Dwarves?" Aladdin was happy to see them. He clapped his hands and said, "Thank you, Lady Luck, you're still here. How unlucky. I walked a lot yesterday and finally found a cave to sleep in. When I woke up after setting up the trap, the snow had already blocked the entrance of the cave. I dug for a long time with a small shovel. When I came out, I found out that the snow had collapsed and I was trapped under several meters of snow. I was going to continue to the Iron Dwarves, but the snow was too deep. When I stepped down, it reached my thighs. There was no way to continue. So I went back the way I came. I wanted to see if I could go to the Elven Kingdom with you. I heard that there are a lot of delicious food there." Soren looked at his legs. Sure enough, they were soaked from the soles of his feet to his thighs. Even his waist had traces of melted snow. This meant that the snow outside might be even bigger than here. The little halfling walked like a radish in a hole. The innkeeper's expression gradually turned serious. He glanced at Aladdin's height and calculated it in his heart. He said in a deep voice, "Not good. With this thickness of snow, winter has already begun." The expressions of the other people in the hotel also changed slightly. Even if the snow only reached Aladdin's knees, It was still nearly 30 centimeters thick. Looking at the snow in Wuxia City, it wasn't that serious. But if the snow outside was really that thick, it would directly seal off the mountain. Winter and spring were common sayings here. During the winter season, the beasts would begin to hibernate. Many monsters in the wilderness would also rely on stored food to survive. Usually, the hungry monsters would only become active after the winter ended. Inside the tower of Wuxia City, a group of strangely dressed drool gathered on a certain floor. There were elves, humans, and half-elves here. Among them, the number of half-elves was the largest, and the number of humans was the smallest. However, the leader was a tall elven drool with antlers. More than a dozen drools sat around a rectangular table. Some of them had already quarreled because of different opinions. Quiet. The tall staghorn drool slammed the table and said in a deep voice, "One by one, Thornwalker, you first." The one who stood up was a pure-blooded elven drool. He looked around with his sharp eyes and said seriously, "The early arrival of the snow this year has proved that we have been too weak in the past. This is the punishment of the god of nature and the goddess of snow for endless destruction. We should have let the wrath of nature descend on those stupid humans long ago." The Grosso Plain in the southeast has been seriously desertified. The endless reclamation of farmland and destruction of the environment has caused the land there to lose its vitality. It won't be long before that place gradually becomes barren and becomes part of the desert. In the wild forest in the southwest, more than 1/3 of the trees have been cut down in the past 30 years. Nature is roaring. This is its punishment for the entire world. The early arrival of winter is a sign. If we don't do anything, there will be more terrible natural disasters in the future. I suggest that we send out the Thornwalker patrol team to let those stupid and ignorant greedy humans who are blinded by the benefits in front of them experience the wrath of nature. I object. An old human drool stood up and frowned. He looked at the other party and said slowly, "It's not only humans who are destroying the environment. Dwarves, gnomes, and elves are all destroying the environment to a certain extent. The world is developing with civilization, and civilization will inevitably conflict with nature. What we need to do is to find a new balance point between civilization and nature, instead of strictly adhering to the way of nature in the past and always using violence to solve all problems." A beautiful half-elf drool knocked on the table with her finger and said softly, "Recently, many people have been dissatisfied with us, especially because of the last attack. The attitude of the wizards towards us is very dangerous. The power of nature's wrath should not be abused. We should send people to warn them first. If there is no effect, we should send out patrols to drive them away. Unless it is necessary, I suggest that we don't start a large-scale war. We can arrange for apprentices to plant the trees that have been cut down as their new mission. It will take at most 10 years for the sower to turn that place into a new forest." The Thornwalker looked at her and said in a deep voice, "Then what? Let those humans continue to cut down trees? Their demand for nature is endless. A tree needs more than 10 years to grow, but they can cut down thousands of trees in a day. In the civilization that they have developed, I only see endless destruction and disasters. Do you want to see the rise of another alchemy city?" The leader of the Staghorn Droll knocked on the table and said in a deep voice, "The disaster of the Arcane Empire cannot be repeated. Civilization can never be higher than nature. But we can't always use violence. Don't be blinded by anger. Thornwalker. This may just be an accident. Perhaps we should do something to stop the destruction of nature by others. Not only humans but also gnomes and dwarves. Many elves have also forgotten the ways of nature recently. Perhaps we should send people to remind them of their respect for nature. The sudden change of the season is definitely not a good phenomenon. I will send people to the Forest of Dreams to ask Sir Earthwalker. The problem now is that the sudden arrival of winter will lead to a great disaster. The animals should have stored as much fat as possible to survive the winter, but the heavy snow more than a month in advance has forced them into a state of hibernation. The monsters in the wilderness don't have enough food either. Once they run out of food, they'll attack other creatures. Animals are the first to be harmed, and then they'll attack other species. The food chain in the natural world will be unbalanced. We have to ensure that all species can continue to reproduce after winter. As long as we get through this winter, the power of nature will rebalance these creatures. The other droll nodded. The Thornwalker also took a deep breath and said slowly, "Sir Stag, I'm afraid we can't maintain the balance with our strength. The area covered by this snow is too large. I suggest we ask for help from other droll." The tall staghorn droll nodded and said in a deep voice, "I know. You can start. Hawkeye Walker, Go and see if the ogres in the Thorn-Tooth Highland can survive the winter. Remember, don't let them leave the gathering place. This group of stupid guys will only cause more damage. Master Deadwood, go take a look at the situation in the northern forest. It would be best if you could count how many animals won't be able to survive this winter. We must help them when necessary to ensure that their species can continue to reproduce. Orders were given one by one. Finally, the leader of the druids with antlers looked at the beautiful half-elf druid beside him and slowly said, "Your Excellency Nightingale, I hope you can take a trip to the elven forest. First, visit the Earth Walker and ask if there are any problems with the change of seasons this time. Then, go to the Earth Elemental Gate and see if the dragon is still sleeping." The handsome half-elf drool nodded and said, "Okay. I'll go now. Be careful." The leader Staghorn drool said again, "There is an altar connected to the Earth Elemental Plane. Don't disturb the sleeping Earth Elemental Spirit, and don't disturb the dragon. They have bad tempers." The half-elf drool smiled and waved her hand. A beautiful nightingale landed on her shoulder. The nightingale used its beak to comb its feathers, then circled above her head and made a clear and pleasant chirping sound. Soon, only the leader Staghorn drool was left in the hall. He looked into the distance with worried eyes and stood motionless on the balcony. Soon, snow and ice covered his body. There were migratory birds that froze to death outside. They didn't have time to migrate, so many of them froze to death overnight. The temperature became colder and colder. A few days ago they could still wear a coat, but now many people had to wear winter clothes. This was only the beginning of winter. If the weather continued to be so cold, it would be a disaster for humans, half-elves, and dwarves. The staghorn droll looked through the white wind and snow. He saw the crops covered in snow. There were villagers whose lips were blue from the cold working in the fields, trying to dig through the ice and snow to bring back food and vegetables. Children in thin clothes didn't even dare to go out of their houses. They gathered around the fire pit in their houses to keep warm. Nature was balanced. Those beasts and monsters were part of nature. These humans and half-elves were also part of nature. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.